Okay, I think we're almost ready to get started. If you have your food, if you have your drinks, and ready for 4 hours of China's policy towards the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much for joining us here today on the issue of China's policy towards the Korean Peninsula. We know that with North Korea's continued nuclear program and continued nuclear provocation, China's policy deliberations and hopefully cooperation someday are going to be of critical importance in resolving the difficult issue at hand. After 2 decades of efforts to engage China on the North Korea nuclear issue, Western observers, including American observers, are finally coming to terms with the fact that China's policy towards the Korean Peninsula has its own logic, and its rationality is fundamentally different from ours. As presented by the 3 Chinese experts in the Stimson report, which you all have a copy, Chinese perspectives towards the Korean Peninsula in the aftermath of North Korea's 4th nuclear test. China has and will continue to stand by its conventional wisdom of maintaining friendly ties with Pyongyang. The policy originates from a fundamental judgment about the geopolitical balance of power vis-a-vis the United States on the Korean Peninsula. While China's rational approach is believed to have protected, or at least believed by the Chinese, to have protected China's perceived national interests, its policies and goals are not short of inconsistencies, problems, conflicts, and issues with other countries. So while this approach is in line with China's current assertive foreign policy style, it does raise some questions about the kind of leadership that China is developing and projecting. So today, for the program, we have 2 panels. The first one will be on the Chinese views, and the second one, to be chaired by Professor Moon from Brookings Institution, will provide reflections and critiques from the American and Korean perspective. It is our great pleasure to welcome 3 Chinese speakers. They flew from Beijing flew in last night. Professor Tiejun, professor at the School of International Studies and Vice President of the Institute of International and Strategic Studies of Peking University. He is a strategic thinker. He's an expert on Northeast Asia security and foreign policies, and he is going to give us China's blueprint for the Korean Peninsula in President Xi Jinping's grand foreign strategy. Secondly, we have Professor Ren Yuanzhe, who is a professor from the China Foreign Affairs University, which is affiliated with the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Professor Ren is going to provide insights on the rapprochement between China and South Korea since 2013 under the leadership of both President Park and President Xi. Interestingly, he will also give us a very interesting revelation about China's internal debate on the importance and the strategic positioning of South Korea for China. Last but not least, we have Professor Wang Junsheng, who is a professor and director for China's regional studies in the National Institute of International Strategy at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. He will tackle perhaps the most difficult question, China's relationship with North Korea. All 3 professors, they are academics. Nevertheless, they all participate extensively in Chinese government's policy consultation and deliberation. We hope that through today's panels, they could help us better understand China's seemingly inconsistent policies and how China identifies its most important national interests. So without further ado, to open the panel, and the first speaker will be Professor Yu. on the strategic importance of the Supreme Peninsula in China's grand strategy. Let's please welcome Professor Yu.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tiejun from School of International Studies, Peking University. I've been planning to me the talk to talk about significance of global strategy or grand strategy and the position of the Korea Peninsula in this global strategy. But I'm not sure whether strategy or not. But the ticket for granted the other one. So I would like to talk about several points here. Mainly, a special relationship between China and the DPRK and why it's so difficult to have such bilateral relations. And secondly, is the ultimate improvement the best time the ROK relations. And then how this China's relationship with the two Koreas was tested by the North Korean nuclear test and the concluding remarks. So first of all, the introduction. So we, after President Xi Jinping took power, we have a lot of busyness in Chinese foreign policy, like AIIB, One Belt Plan, CICA, CICA meetings, and also AIC in these time state. So a lot of people talk about Chinese grand strategy has changed from keeping a low profile to making some contribution or proactive contribution, in the past 3 years or so. I think that China's two-Korea policy could be a good point perspective to look at the Chinese grand strategy or Chinese foreign policy, because of the specialty of this relationship. I participated in a workshop last week in Japan on Northeast Asia security environment. My ROK South Korea colleagues asked me why China is always so deeply concerned with the Korea Peninsula. So this is I think is a very important question to think about. Why China is so deeply concerned about the Korea Peninsula? For that question, I think we need to look back into the history. China has just think about the first sign of the Peninsula in 1894 to 1895, which changed the East Asia, I think, power structure fundamentally. Just think about the Korea War, which was the first, the first international war conducted by People's Republic of China after it was established. So all this kind of I think you can understand why China is so deeply involved in the Korea Peninsula issue. If you look at China's Korea Peninsula bilateral relations, peninsula relations nowadays, it's also very interesting. For instance, DPRK is the only, I think, only formal ally of China, a formal ally. Although Chinese government would not like to admit this or use the term alliance to describe the bilateral relations. We use the words the traditional, the normal relationship. Now the term is normal relationship, a bilateral relationship with a traditional friendship. It's very complicated. But if you look at the alliance treaty signed in 1961, especially Article 2 and Article 7, obviously, bilateral relations is an alliance relationship. That's very unique. For a long time, even during Cold War, China has advocated a kind of policy of non-alignment, which China still insists on nowadays, why aligning with North Korea. Now, North Korea, which was regarded as a pivotal country in China's neighborhood diplomacy in the past 3 years, and I think it was also very important. So I will explain why. So when we talk about this is a background. You can look at this kind of map, and that's the history. When thinking about China-Korea Peninsula relationship, we can never forget this kind of relationship with emotion, with bonds of sentiments. Hundreds of thousands of people died for this peninsula, and many of them are still alive. So that will be a very, difficult situation for the Chinese decision maker to think about, the Korea Peninsula policy, especially the North Korea policy. The Korea also, the Korea Peninsula issue is important also because of its related to the regional security and even to the, its impact, having impact on Chinese major power relationship nowadays. Just think about, the North Korean nuclear crisis. It's about for the non-proliferation treaty, which China has endorsed, supported, and nowadays, China wants to be a responsible power. What kind of responsible power? Be responsible for this kind of security regime. That's the bedrock. I again NPT as the bedrock of non-proliferation treaty, which the North Korea, crisis, nuclear crisis, directly challenge this kind of security. So we have weapons of mass destruction, the missile of North Korea, and combined with the potential military conflict in the Korea Peninsula. It's still there. So every day, the DMZ, you could sense the atmosphere of the war and the conflict. And we have North Korea new leadership, also in the past 4 years, stabilized his power very quickly in the military, and also put the nuclear development as well as the economic development in the North Korea constitutions, which was emphasized in the newly launched 7th Congress of the Workers' Parties of the DPRK. So where is North Korea? So it's very dark here. But even it's very dark. It's very North Korea is a country very, very nationalistic, very resilient. I think I visit North Korea several times. I think it's orderly society. still, many of our policymakers or think tankers, the precondition for their thinking is, the collapse, the imminent collapse of the regime. I don't know when it will collapse. I just think we cannot, put our analysis to the conditions, to the precondition of this so it will collapse. I think this will be dangerous. So the special relationships, I think in the past 3 years became not so special. After President Stimson took power, you can find that kind of a change. China's North Korea policy change in several aspects. First of all, China's, I think Chinese North Korea policy, we prioritize the denuclearization. President Xi Jinping met the special envoy of North Korea, in 2013. If you look at that discussion, he mentioned 3 times denuclearization in his talk with the special envoy. There is no smile on his face. They shook hands with each other. And secondly, you can also find China taking a firm hand than before in the economic sanctions, the UN Security Council resolution after the 4th nuclear test conducted by North Korea. You can find after the 2 leaders, Tiejun and President Xi Jinping took power in the past 3 or 4 years, they didn't meet with each other, which I think was very unusual. You look back into the history of the 2 parties, why they cannot meet with each other. So I think China's position on this, on the denuclearization, I think is clear. But the Chinese change of its North Korea policy is very hard to do. You can find this picture. Was President Xi Jinping met the WPT delegation led by Jung-Yeop just last week. After the 4th nuclear test conducted by North Korea. So I think that it's very hard for China to change its North Korea policy, although we can find some new developments in President Xi Jinping's North Korea policy. Why is the case? I think that at least several factors can account for this kind of difficulties. First of all is ideological factor. North Korea still was regarded as a socialist country, a communist country. We had the President Xi Jinping's talk with the Korean leaders, the delegations. President Xi Jinping still congratulate the opening of the party's congress, and hoping DPRK to make some new achievements in socialist construction, such kind of comments. So it's very hard for 2 countries with this kind of ideological affinity it's very hard for China to take a pocket policy or to coordinate, for instance, with the United States to tackle this North Korea issues. I think we understand from this point. Secondly, is the geopolitical factor. In China, we have an idiom called Yuanzhe, and it's the peak logic. I think it's a kind of a buffering state logic. although many experts doubt about these factors are still useful. North Korea as a buffer state, but for the average people, they're still regarded as a very important factor. So North Korea always emphasizes this when talking to the Chinese people. They are the guard of the northeast of China. And we still emphasize the traditional friendship between these two countries, which I think it's very hard to explain, but it's still still very important. We fight together during the Korea War, and many of the old guys are veteran PLA still alive. So it's very hard to explain to this kind of people, to change fundamentally China's DPRK policy. An economic factor that's important for the Korea, for the DPRK sides, and also important on all sides. This kind of factor combined together, I think, is very hard to change DPRK policy. So I think President Xi Jinping's DPRK policy should be understood within this framework. He wants to change, want to make some new, contributions, make achievements as a responsible power, neighborhood diplomacy, it's the denuclearization of the Peninsula, peace and stable, no war, no chaos, this kind of thing. But it's very hard to push these things forward. The China-ROK bilateral relations is a big achievement, I think, if you look at the past 2 years of the bilateral relations. President Xi Jinping and President Park had met with each other, if I remember correctly, or calculated correctly, about already 8 times in the past 3 years, in different occasions, including President Xi Jinping's state visit, a single visit, only to one country, not a serious country, in 2014. And all that was to keep close coordinations, ministry levels, deputy ministry levels, a lot of mechanism was established in the past 3 years. And economically, there is a very prominent, very distinctive development in the past several years. China is now the #1 partner for South Korea. We have established the free trade, agreement last year. So that's a very important cooperations. And politically, culturally, and culturally, it's also very important bilateral relations. The two countries boast each other's largest overseas tourism destination and largest sources for overseas students. More than 60,000 Korean students studied in China, and more than 60,000 Chinese students studied in Europe. So it's a very close. I think more than 60% or 70% of the foreign students who took part in the Chinese language test are from South Korea. So it's a very close bilateral relationship. Why South Korea is so important in Chinese strategic calculation? First of all, I think that this bilateral relation is obviously is important. South Korea is a stronger, side in the Korea Peninsula. even though we prepare for the emergency of Korea Peninsula, we need to coordinate with the stronger side. That's ROK. Its importance in Chinese Korea Peninsula strategic thinking. And also it's an important, I think, strategic asset to offset, the pressures, strategic pressures from the American side. And also, we can coordinate with each other in confrontation with Japan in such kind of issues like this history issues. President Park visited China last year, participating in the September 3rd, the military parade, which was a big support to President Xi. And side by side with the President Putin, with the President Xi Jinping. And the economic relationship also is very important for the two countries. But this change, the rebalance of China's relationship with the two Koreas was tested by the nuclear test conducted by the North Korea this year, earlier this year. According to the ROK sources, President Park actually called immediately President Xi Jinping via the hotline, but no response. After 1 month, they resumed the talk via the hotline. So the President Xi Jinping explains, the Chinese position. And first of all, they congratulated with each other for this Chinese Spring Festival, something like that. So how the North Korea responds, in some sensitive issues, strategic issues like the thought, it seems to me they hesitate to talk about this issue before, but after the nuclear test, the United States and the ROK began to talk about, the working schedule of the deployment of that. It's very hard. It seems to me it's very hard to hold a balance between the two Koreas, which China wants. We want to keep a special relationship with North Korea. We are allies. We want to denuclearize, and we want to denuclearization be as a peaceful and stable way through the dialogue. It's very hard to do. We want to keep a good relationship with North Korea. Even in the One Belt, One Road initiatives, ARIB, we think ROK is very important country. Also, when there is the bilateral relations, the inter-Korean relations became worse. It's very hard to keep this kind of balance. So I would like to conclude in 3 points. You look at the past 3 years, this is the new developments in China's policy under the leadership of Xi Jinping is to show a powerful leadership in domestic governance as well as in the foreign policy arena. These new developments and their leadership should be analyzed within the framework of this grand strategy or the potential grand strategy and the specialty of the China Korea Peninsula relationship. Secondly, with the rising tensions on the Korea Peninsula caused by DPRK's new long-term nuclear test, China is increasingly caught in the two Koreas. I think the weakness dealing with North Korea and the global leading role it wants to play. This is how to do in this kind of tensions. I'm not sure. There are still too many ifs in China's Korea Peninsula policy. It's unlikely to get a clear answer to this question before China could form a domestic consensus on how to deal with North Korea. In China, there is a great debate, especially North Korea policy. sometimes if we had a discussion among you and among the scholars, we need to separate the scholars in two groups, in the morning and in the afternoon. Otherwise, they could fight with each other. So I would like to stop here. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Professor Yu. That's a very interesting presentation. It's comprehensive, it's thoughtful, and it shows us a lot of interesting aspects. So the hot line is not so hot, and the cold ties with North Korea is not so cold. Secondly, we're going to have Professor Ren from China Foreign Affairs University to tell us how to manage this relationship between China and South Korea and some of the internal debates, not just about North Korea, but also about South Korea as well. So Professor Ren.
Okay, thank you again for your very kind introduction. It's my great pleasure and sincere gratitude to be invited to this very important event in Stimson. First of all, I would like to express my sincere condolence for the tragedy in Holland, the shooting. I think it's my, I have a very deep feeling. We have many difficulties and many security issues domestically and globally that we need to handle in the future. Not only the Korea issue, but also some very important domestic security issues. So I can understand how difficult it is for the United States to become to be maintain the hegemony in the world. So too many things to handle at the same time. I have the assignment given by Yun on China-ROK relations. I think I will touch upon this topic in 3 parts. Actually, and including the concluding remarks. Just as Professor Yu Qiejin has mentioned in his speech. Now, after his inauguration, it has a very big global strategy, both globally and also regionally, especially in Northeast Asian region. I think it's become very important in our neighborhood strategy, and especially on China-ROK relations. I think it has been undergoing up and down since recent years. First of all, I would like to talk about the brief introduction of China-ROK relations after the Cold War. The very brief timeline after Cold War, I think China-ROK relations has passed 3 stages or 3 steps. In 1992, we normalized our relationship because in the Cold War, China and the ROK belong to different camps, and it's very important. In 1992, we get it back to the normal track, and after that, we enjoyed a very fast development of our bilateral relations. And for China, we try to keep a balance on North and South affairs. And after several decades, in Kim Il-sung reading book, and in 2008, we upgrade the China-ROK relations to comprehensive cooperative partnership. Now in China, we call it a partnership network. China-ROK relations is at a very top tier. So it's very important we sign agreements and make consensus on building such kind of very important bilateral relations. After that, we can see a very rapid development of the China-ROK relations. But I think in 2010, after the Chongnan Navy ship sank, and the Yongqing artillery shell from the north. China and ROK, we have very different perspectives on how to, manage the security issues on the Peninsula. I remember the second day of the Yongqing artillery fight. I joined a delegation, went to South Korea to Seoul, discussed this very tough issue. At that time, China faced very deep criticism from the South Korea. But at that time, we still very strongly on the North Korea side, and we try to defend on top of North Korea. That is the situation at that time. But since then, I think after Xi Jinping took office in 2012, we have a very big and a very obvious change of our attitude toward North Korea, and also we have some further balance on the Korean policy. Second part of my speech, I will touch upon several parts that we can get, which we can get to observe the China-ROK relations development in the past 3 years. Some of the points have already been mentioned by Professor Yu, so I will be very brief. First of all, it's political relations. I think it's quite, we can see a very hot, high-level exchange between the two countries. China met with Park for 8 times, but despite not having yet personally met with Kim Jong-un, I think it's very special when we look at China's policy on the Korean Peninsula. And on the other hand, China, we established a very different or very high-level exchanges between not only between our leaders but also between our chief for national security and the Blue House and the China State Consular. We have the annual exchange, and also different layer of exchange is very frequent in China and our relations. My university, I have hosted China-South Korea strategic dialogue among the think tanks for the last, I think, 30 years. So you can witness a very hot exchange between the two. Politically, I think China-ROK relations have become the best ever national relations in history. That is the word I quoted from President Xi last week when he met his Park last year. And the second part is economic. I think economically, we achieved the FTA, and which went into effect on December 20 last year. It's a very important milestone in the bilateral relations between China and ROK. Because last year, the total trade volume increased to $275.8 billion US. That's a huge amount between the two countries. And also in the FTA, I think it's very important to observe that tariffs. The landmark document eliminates tariffs on almost 90% of the two sides goods. From Chinese side, we even include, the financial, telecommunication, e-commerce into the FTA. That's very important to show China's sincerity to implement the FTA. But also there are some doubt from the South Korea perspective, and also from other parts that now South Korea is too reliant on China. It's a kind of asymmetrical interdependence. So it worries some kind of hot economic relations could make South Korea further closer to China. That won't be very good for the U.S. national interest. That is the economic side, and another one is strategically. China and South Korea, we are seeking alignment in our development strategies. In Xi Jinping's global strategy, OBOR is very important. And for Park, she also, released the Eurasian initiative. Both leaders, we have agreed to see some, alignment on the two very big strategic initiatives. And we can see the picture because the Eurasian continent, both the goal that and the playground that China and South Korea are expecting to cooperate upon. So it's very important that we have some kind of initiative, strategic synergy. And I also think it's very promising for the further cooperation on those strategic issues. And last but not least, we have make some basic, I would say, basic, agreement on the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. That's from the security aspect. Now we during Xi's visit to Seoul in 2010, the two sides achieved a 4-point consensus on nuclear issues. So it's, I think it's very important for the two sides to show to the outside that we can cooperate on the nuclear issue. And, although we see some turbulence or some slippery of our relations after the fourth nuclear test, but I could say the basic consensus are still there, which with the characteristic of denuclearization and peace, stability, and negotiation to settle the disputes on the question. I think that those are the common points that China and ROK hit in our policy. That's very important. And the third part of my paper make some very specific analysis of the debates among the Chinese academic communities on how China could handle our relations with ROK. I try to categorize it into 4 schools. The first school I call it the idealist school. The main point posed by the school is that China should try to establish alliance with ROK. And I think it's a little ideal, so I call it idealist school. The representative of this school is Professor Jung-Yeop from Tsinghua University. In his book and his speeches, he mentioned many times that China and South Korea shares some mutual security interests. So we could further enhance our relations to an upgrade into alliance. And South Korea could keep alliance with the US and at the same time have an alliance relationship with China. And some other scholars have the same points. I think it's the first time in Chinese policy debate we have tried to pursue alliance with another country. So it's very, very remarkable. But there is only a small group of people, I could say. A second group, I make it as an institutionalist school. That is, that means that China will regard ROK as a pivot state. in China's big strategy, especially for the OBOR, we want to seek some so-called pivotal states. In Northeast Asian countries, I think South Korea is a very, very important, and in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and in East Europe, we have some other candidates for the pivotal states. And the pivotal states, I think China could make it a pivot to expand our strategy. And so some other countries in those regions could follow the pivotal states. And especially in Northeast Asian region, other countries could maintain at least a positive neutral that will not seek alliance with the US to encircle China. And that is why we make South Korea as a pivotal state. Another very important role for pivotal state to play is to support China's newly established institutions. That is AIIB, which has been mentioned by Professor Tiejun. AIIB and OBOR, those new initiatives are very important in China's grand strategy. So China will try to seek the pivotal states to have further institutionalized cooperation in those institutions. And the third school, I call it the pragmatist school. And for those people, they try to enhance the relationship with ROK in order to make it as a Trojan horse, the Americans' Asian Pacific Alliance system. Is very important for China, to think about the ways to counter-hedge the U.S. rebalance in the Asian Pacific region. As Ashley Carter mentioned in Shangri-La, the U.S. tried to promote the Asian Pacific principle, the security network. I think South Korea is a very important link in the network, and how China can bring the link, that is to make South Korea further rely on China, and it's a very weak point in the circle that we can get South Korea back and to break the network. That is some Chinese scholars just try to make it. That's the reason why some Chinese scholars try to emphasize the importance of South Korea. That is the fourth one. And that is the third one. And the fourth one is the traditionalist school. And I think for this school, many people have a very rational or very balanced point on ROK and DPRK. I think no matter how China can promote China-South Korea relations, but still keep at a low level because South Korea is the alliance of the U.S. and the U.S. can play some card to try to intrude in the China-ROK relations. For example, the SAT is a very small card, but it has made China, South Korea into big relation into big trouble. So for those schools, for the traditionalists, they do not believe China has the ability to undermine the solid military alliance between the U.S. and the ROK. So China needs to keep a very cautious balance on the Korean Peninsula. Do not make North Korea so far from us. That is the fourth school. And I think nowadays in Chinese academic community, is very hot and a very intensified discussion on how to identify ROK in our strategic blueprint. So we have those four schools, very representative for schools, but I could say for China's policy on the ROK, we are very consistent, and we have we have some obstacles to tackle in the future. First, I think it's a not clear issue. We know when I talk with South Korea diplomats, they always say China and ROK can make agreement on any issue except for North Korea. Although we have the full consensus, but the way to achieve the full consensus is different. So after the first nuclear test and the missile launch and the continual provocation from the North Korea, I think China and the South Korea relations will be in some trouble, and the hotline not so hot, and this I think the problem is still there. That's is the most important part or obstacle for the future in development of bilateral relations. Second is SART. We can see a new round of South Korea-China row over SART in Shangri-La. China military officer and the South Korea defense minister have some encounters in Shangri-La. And I think if South Korea if the U.S. deployment of SART realized in the near future, it will be another big blow on our capability. And another issue, maybe maritime security, I could say it's a potential black point. Because now in East China Sea, South China Sea, we have some problems with relevant parties. At present, South Korea is not further involved in those issues, but I could say if I could understand now the U.S., Japan, and other countries try to persuade South Korea for further engagement in the maritime issue. If South Korea have some announcement that will make China-ROK relations into some problem. Because China have some maritime demarcation problem with South Korea, and the maritime issue could be a potential black point for both of us. Last, my concluding remarks. I think in the future, ROK will still be very important in China's global strategy, especially in Northeast Asia. In this region, ROK should still have a very important position, especially at least in the Stimson area and the Park area. I think both sides want to stabilize the bilateral relations. In order to stabilize the relations, I think first of all we need to maintain the directions put forward by the two leaders in the past 4 years. It's very important. The direction should be still there. And second, I think we need to know our bilateral relations not only political or economic. We have a very hot people-to-people exchange in the past few years. I think that is a very solid basis for the future political path between us. And last but not least, we need to have some. We call it the domestic problem or the third-party effect. In South Korea, Park faced some problem in domestic politics, especially after the ruling party lost so many seats in the April election, and it's partly described as the slam dunk, and that will be a problem for her to further demonstrate its foreign policy. And in China, we are now also facing a very big pressure on our economic development. So, and also the Chinese people, you see, the nationalists and capitalist and also populist feeling spreading in Chinese people. So I think the public opinion could be another factor that can be both a burden, or pressure, or something we can use to try to make our bilateral relations into a new normal. That's very important to really take it into consideration. Thank you very much.
Well, this is wonderful. Just as a short notice, we are going to have the PPT, PPT, not PPT, the PowerPoint on our website, so you don't need to take comprehensive notes. I'm sure the audience will have a lot of questions about the issue of South Korea, but in the discussion of the new normal, Professor Ren did raise the point that basically DPRK, North Korea, can anytime use its own actions to sabotage the relationship between China and South Korea. So how is China going to handle that? We have Professor Wang from the China Academy of Social Sciences to give us some answers. Professor Wang.
Really my first pleasure to be here, but my pronunciation is not very good. So yeah, if I have some problem, I will send to my colleagues. Okay. The first part I want to explain is why China supports the UN resolution 2270 appear. Apparently, there are different viewpoints. Yeah, I have some talk discussion with American friend and South Korea friend. Yeah, they told me, okay, maybe the first reason is South China Sea issue. The second reason is the Southern issue. And they think, okay, maybe China want to make a bargain. Yes, supporting this kind of resolution. But I do not think so. From my own analysis, I think there are mainly two reasons. The first reason is for China, I mean, just want to punish DPRK. Yeah, as we can see since Xi Jinping took office, yeah, we can see the relation between China and DPRK is not very good. I think the most difficult question is nuclear issue between two countries. As we know, yeah, since Kim Jong-Un took office, this is the second nuclear test. So from Chinese side, I think we have the choice how to give punishment and send a very, very strong signal to Kim Jong-Un. The second reason, I think, China's responsibility, just like today, our definition from Chinese leaders, we also say, okay, we are the largest developing country. But you can mention, you can notice that maybe more and more, China, our definition, China, we think we are the major player among the powers. But I think as a great power, yeah, if we want to be accepted by the international community, I think you should offer public goods. So from this point, yeah, we can understand AIIB, one belt, one road. Yeah, I think China also want to offer public goods. Yeah, so such kind of activities. As we can understand, security is also very, very important in public goods. We know the fourth nuclear test by DPRK, military DPRK, obviously, I think, violate the security situation in the region. Yeah, we can stand. So from Chinese side, I think as a responsible country, yeah, we also have no choice but to punish DPRK. So I think the main reason for China support such kind of very, very severe resolution, I think maybe we can understand through these 2 points. The second part is I want to mention to analyze what kind of lessons China can learn from my own viewpoint. I can say maybe the first lesson China should learn. Maybe we can learn is just like my colleague mentioned. If as the first time, I mean, as early as possible. If President Xi Jinping receive or give phone call to Park Geun-hye, I think the public response, public opinion in ROK, even in the international community, I think we will be better. At that time, in the previous 3 months this year, I was a witness scholar in South Korea. Yeah, at that time, I really feel that in ROK, they really very, very highly expectation. At the first time, maybe the two leaders can have a direct dialogue. But yeah, as we know, maybe China, yeah, we have many reasons we refuse. Yeah, people or receive such kind of phone call. The second reason is the unilateral sanctions toward the DPRK. I think we should issue as early as possible. Yeah. We know at the last, I mean, before the resolution passed, we also issued such kind of unilateral sanctions. But I think it should be early. Also from ROK and the US side, yeah, I think we also maybe have some lessons. The first lesson, I think, from ROK side, also maybe from US side, yeah, you should understand the complicated maybe situation China facing. Yeah, I think for Korea Peninsula situation, for China, I think it's more complicated maybe than you think. Maybe than I can say, maybe than US or maybe ROK you are facing. Yeah, because from Chinese side, we are not only maybe we have to make a assessment about maybe okay, maybe what kind of maybe US will respond, or maybe what really happened maybe in such kind of situation. So it's too complicated. So I think from our side, yeah, should give China maybe more time. The secondly, I think the ROK or US, yeah, you should pay more attention to China's value in interest. Yeah. I think in this respect, yeah, especially for South Asia, we know in the January 6th, yeah, DPRK made the nuclear test. At the second day, yeah, ROK said, okay, we may deploy SADC in ROK soil. You know, this kind of issue, yeah, definitely opposed by China. Yeah, from Xi Jinping and also maybe from our foreign minister. So maybe we can compare. Yeah, we compare with the previous 3 nuclear tests made by DPRK. Maybe we stand in the similar. I mean, China, ROK, and the US. But in the fourth, I mean, SADC issue, yeah, really, I mean, they make China, yeah, feel maybe okay. The situation maybe more complicated. Yeah, so this is, I think, maybe the second point. Okay, last one. I want to imply maybe in the future situation, I mean, what kind of factors we should pay attention to. Maybe the first factor is how DPRK will respond to the UN Resolution 2270. I can say, yeah, so far so good. Yeah, but we do not know yet what's the next. Yeah, we can see today DPRK make the diplomatic channels. They want to remove the isolation from international community. But I can say maybe I do not think it works. So what's next? Yeah, if DPRK feel okay, it doesn't work. Yeah, if another nuclear test happens, yeah, definitely, I mean, vicious circle around the Korea Peninsula situation will happen again. The second factor is how Sino-DPRK relations will evolve. Also, my colleagues also explain the importance of such kind of relationship. From my analysis, I think the relationship from Chinese side is not only in the interest of our two countries, but for regional stability. I think in Northeast Asia, we can say Korea Peninsula is a strategic geopolitical center in Northeast Asia. It's very, very important for China. You can see it's very close with Beijing, with Shanghai, even with the middle of China. So stability is very, very important for China. So we can see facing the imbalanced structure around the Korea Peninsula. So the the relation between China and DPRK is very, very important. So from Chinese side, we really, I think I can feel, we really made a great efforts. Try to maintain such kind of relationship. But we can say today, we can even we can say so far we can say maybe the new leader, is very unfriendly, toward China. At the same time, you can say China gave a very, very huge pressure. What's the next step? If the relationship, I mean, for standard DPRK, or maintain, even worse, I think the situation around the Korean Peninsula, maybe another, just like I mentioned, maybe vicious circle. The third factor is the Southern issue. I think the Southern issue for China is not only bilateral relationship issue, but a regional issue. Maybe you can see today, not only opposed by China, but also by Russia. Also, from Chinese viewpoint, it's not a military, technological issue, but also strategic issue. I think from Chinese side, our front, we think, okay, we have a huge common interest in China and ROK. So from Chinese viewpoint, okay, ROK, you should stand a balanced position between China and the US. Just like I mentioned, for Southern issue, I think from Chinese assessment, it's a zero-sum game between China and the US. You can understand. So if at the last, if the Southern deployed, I mean in the soil of ROK, I think from Chinese assessment, maybe we can make the decision, make the assessment is okay. Maybe ROK, they will give up their balanced position in China and the US. So from Chinese side, we really serious about this issue. So if Southern deployed in ROK, it will definitely, I think, will affect the cooperation between China and ROK. Also, it definitely will affect the relationship between China and the US. I mean, in the Korea Peninsula cooperation. Maybe the fourth one is joint military drill by US and ROK. I think this issue, this kind of military drill, not only opposed by DPRK, I think also maybe strongly opposed by China. Why? I think there are two reasons. The first reason we think for the DPRK nuclear issue, maybe there are two reasons. The first reason is the wrong policy, maybe misjudgment by DPRK. Maybe second reason is just like I mentioned earlier, imbalanced structure. Mainly I think the security threat by US and ROK. Maybe you cannot feel that kind of threat. But from North Korea side, they really feel very, very big threat. You can imagine in every year, maybe almost 4 months, the such kind of very, very intensive military drill among North Korea border. So from North Korea side, it's a very, very big threat. Also from China, when China oppose such kind of military drill. Yeah, you can understand yellow sea is China's near sea. Also, it's very, very close with the political center, economical center, even the population center in China. So from Chinese side, okay, if you cannot stop such kind of military drill, yeah, you really should think about maybe you can move into another area. Such as in the Pacific Ocean. So such kind of military drill. So I really want to tell my American friends, it's time for you to think about this issue if you really want to resolve Korean Peninsula issue. The last one is the peace treaty. Yeah, peace treaty. Armistice agreement. Yeah, formed into peace treaty. It put forward by China Foreign Ministry. I think China also feels serious about this proposal. But currently, you can see from US side, from our side, yeah, the response is not very, very positive. But I think it's very good. To make this situation better. In this proposal, I think, yeah, we will not only talk about such as maybe the military drill by US and ROK. Yeah, also, I think we also will ask DPRK, you should make commitment, make a promise for denuclearization. If I think if DPRK do not make such kind of commitment, I do not think China will agree to such kind of treaty talks. So we can say a lot of issues will be discussed in such kind of treaty talk. So I think it's a very, very good talk. So if we really want to resolve the questions Korean Peninsula facing today, yeah, I think we should give much attention to, yeah, for such kind of talk. Okay, thanks.
Okay, that's a lot of food for thoughts. And very interesting remark about China's policy. It definitely shows that the deeply embedded zero-sum perception, not only vis-a-vis the United States, but also in terms of South Korea. So we have about 40 minutes for questions and answers, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions. So I'll refrain from asking my own. And if you do have a question, I'll ask that you identify yourself, your name and affiliation, and please do not make super long comments. Focus on the questions. Thank you very much. Chris, please.
Waiting for mics.
Are we using mics? Well, time is of essence. So
Okay, I'm gonna speak up.
yeah, speak up, please.
Thank
And
you.
I'll repeat the question.
Thank you. My name is Chris Nelson. I do a report on this stuff every day, 30 years now. And this particular topic, my God, we've been having this discussion for at least 3 or 4 or 5 years. So it's always interesting to hear an effort to have a different take on it. So thank you very much for that. 2 quick comments and then my question. In one of the talks, you talk about the Japanese threat as a strategic threat to China. I think you need to rethink that, how you talk about it. I think that would be our reaction here, number 1. Number 2, the bad discussion, Americans are having trouble understanding your objection to that, because it sounds to us like you're saying you don't want us to get 5 minutes extra notice on the end of the world. You know? What else would you be worried about? But us detecting first strike on us? We don't get that one, so you got to do a better job on that. My question, and thank you, Professor, right at the end, if I understood you correctly, you think China needs to ask North Korea to commit to denuclearization, and if not, then China's not going to agree to keep pushing, let's get talking. That's the heart of the issue for us. Do we talk to these guys as a nuclear power now in order to get to the point where they might denuclearize? Or do we not talk to them until they say, yes, this is about denuclearization? That's the dilemma. And right now, we're not hearing anything from them that's a yes. So if I understand it, are you recommending to the Chinese government that that be China's policy, or is that your understanding of the Chinese government policy? That the North has to commit in advance to denuclearization before we can have these negotiations that you talk about? Thank you.
Great. So I'll briefly repeat the question. It's about the new track approach that China proposed. That whether about the sequencing, whether we ask North Korea to commit to denuclearization first, and then we will talk. And if not, are we going to talk to them? So by talking to them, we're recognizing their status as a nuclear power, and that's the essence of the issue.
Hello. Yeah. Yeah. Really, I think it's also very, very hot topic in China. Yeah. Also, I'm personally involved in research from the last year for so-called peer-to-peer talk. My understanding is, as a scholar, I think we understand from China's interest and also from the common interest related countries, relevant countries. I think denuclearization for DPRK is the first priority. Yeah, I think for every country, especially for China. Yeah, because DPRK is our neighboring country, But I really can understand, can feel China really feel frustrated. We really want to resolve this issue. But yeah, my understanding is maybe the key for such kind of resolution maybe in the US. Yeah, because what the DPRK really wants from denuclearization, we only can satisfy from US. So from Chinese side, maybe we put forward such kind of framework. Yeah, we think it's a very good platform, maybe to resolve this issue. Yeah, if I can speak more, yeah, maybe one minute. From Chinese side, just like I mentioned, we think there are two reasons for the current situation in Korea Peninsula. I mean, especially for the nuclear DPRK. The first reason is the just like I mentioned earlier, maybe the wrong policy from DPRK. This maybe need to talk, discuss. This is why China always say, okay, secret party talks should be resumed as early as possible because we should talk. The second reason is the Cold War structure among the Korean Peninsula. For this kind of, I mean, if we want to decrease, remove such kind of Cold War structure, I think we need a peace treaty. So if peace treaty, yeah, I mean in the future, peace treaty, I mean mainly focus on the Cold War structure. For secret party talks, yeah, mainly focus on, I mean the talk for the policy. Maybe we can have a close, yeah, we can even mutual understanding. Okay, thanks.
Let me just quickly follow up on that. Sorry for being pushy. So let's suppose that North Korea has not denuclearized yet. Do we sign a peace treaty with them?
Yeah, it's very, very hard. Yeah, it's very, very hard. Even no, I think no. Yeah, no. Yeah, I think for the peace treaty talk, it is a process. Yeah, maybe we need time. Even for denuclearization, from my assessment, I think maybe in the future, yeah, 5 or 10 years, maybe the situation will be changed. I think maybe, but today the dilemma we can say there the policy differences is really very, very, very huge. But I think in the future, maybe 5 or 10 years, maybe better.
So the commitment to denuclearization, that's the
Right.
first
Yes.
most important thing, right?
Yeah, I think in the peer-to-peer talk, so just from my own analysis, I think DPRK definitely need such kind of commitment. If no such kind of commitment, I think from Chinese side, we cannot talk.
Why? Because we do not have the common facility.
Oh, great. Okay. Some other questions. And you have a question?
Andrew Scoville, Wang Corporation. I wonder what each speaker thinks of this. Does Chinese public opinion play a role in China's Korea policy? And if so, what is that role? And also, how if you say yes, how is public opinion assessed, evaluated? How do you know what the Chinese people are thinking? Thank you.
Great. Maybe a couple more questions. Catherine, please.
Hi, Kathy Moon from Brookings Institution. Thank you very much to all the speakers. I have two quick questions. One is, does China have a quote red line regarding nuclear weapons in North Korea and possibly nuclear initiatives that some South Koreans are speaking about in terms of nuclearization of South Korea? And the second is, beyond the North Korean nuclear dilemma, what are, given all the different schools of thought that you shared, what are China's or Chinese people's long-term visions of what the evolution of North Korea might be?
Great. Maybe this gentleman over here.
Yes, Gil Rosman, the Asan Forum. I take this presentation as a warning of what China will do if, as is very likely, South Korea deploys THAAD and the sanctions intensify, the deterrence efforts intensify. So I'd like to hear the follow-up. What will China do? They're sort of threatening. China's going to retaliate. Can you tell us what some of the steps being debated in China might be? Also, in your presentation of 4 schools, this very odd notion that Yuanzhe is the idealist. All of us who've known him for years and years realize that he is the person who's been predicting the Cold War. And when you suggested what he wants for South Korea, I think you were misleading about what actually is intended. And in addition, I got the sense that your pragmatist group and your traditionalist group overlap very heavily, and that what you're saying is that those groups control the main dialogue, and you are reporting their way of thinking.
Okay, well, that's a lot of questions. Maybe our panelists could prepare their brief responses, starting with Professor Yu.
Yes, I would like to respond first of all to Andrew's question about the public opinion, Chinese public opinion about Korea. There is no standard, poll like in the United States or South Korea to indicate this kind of opinion. But let me illustrate it using North Korea. So Chinese public opinion on North Korea. It's very interesting. In the past several years, I think there's a big change in Chinese public opinion about North Korea. The Chinese government used to, it used to be a taboo. We cannot talk about North Korea publicly 4 or 5 years ago. Several of my colleagues, when they talk about in the TV, just said, North Korea needs some reform. They were warned by the government because of the North Korea embassy. They found that and they notified the Chinese government and they shut up. That's 4 or 5 years ago. But the situation completely changed now. You can find a lot of, on the social media, even in the academic journal, so criticizing Sweden, criticizing North Korea, and talk about the policy alternatives about North Korea. So we do not have a standard or exact indicators to show the public opinion change. But did realize, feel that kind of challenge. That's my response to the question.
Professor Byrne, about the next questions.
Okay, thank you for your very very tough points on my false truths. I have to say, first of all, it's only a brief categories of the very diversified debate in the Chinese academic community. I put Yan Xuetong as idealist because I think his idea of seeking alliance with South Korea is too ideal. Although the pursuit of the alliance is to protect China's national interest, to power-oriented, but I think such, not only him, but also some other scholars who follow his way of take South Korea as an alliance, that will be too idealist. In the past, China will always condemn the American alliance system in the Asia-Pacific region. But in recent years, I could feel there's a change of the tone of discussion in the Chinese academic community. More and more scholars began to think about how China could seek alliance with other countries, and which country could be the suitable candidates for China's alliance. Pakistan, some other countries, whether we have some other candidates, because in China now we have a very hot debate, discussion on the major power diplomacy with Chinese characteristics. So very hot debate how China build a partnership, the alliance system. So that is, I think, some points I would like to press in my paper. And for the pragmatic thinking and traditionally thinking, I think they do have some basic differences. Maybe I didn't elaborate enough in my presentation, but in my paper, you could say I make a very clear definition of the pragmatic school. That is, they expect to utilize the enhanced China-ROK strategic cooperative partnership as a leverage to relieve strategic pressure from the US. But for the traditional school, first of all, they would like to keep the China-North Korea relations. They do not want to abandon North Korea. And on the second narrative, they do not believe China can use ROK to counter-hedge the U.S. rebalance strategy. So I think they have some very obvious difference. So that's my explanation.
Can I just follow?
Mm.
If FAD is deployed,
Yeah.
do you see the traditionalist school winning? That is, the pragmatists the traditional will say, see, we couldn't work with ROK, and now we have to work more with North Korea. That's what I get the impression your group has been saying, that the U.S. approach right now and the South Korean approach right now is leading to the traditionalist school winning the debate.
It's very interesting phenomenon that in the past 3 years, I could say there are emerging opinions of abandoning North Korea within the Chinese academic community. But since the fourth nuclear test, the opinion just getting back. It's like a badminton, and it's just the slippery of the China-ROK relations. Just is a very important indicator for the Chinese academic community to have a rational thinking of how to identify ROK in our strategic blueprint. So if the SAR will deploy in the future, and I believe it will be deployed, that will be a very, very big blow on China and on China-ROK relations. So I think the room of change of our policy is quite limited on the third issue. We are very insistent. Of course, we will do some counter hedge or counter measures for those for deployment on SAR. For example, China, I think from an academic point of view, I think China, we will enhance our relations with Russia. We will have maybe have some military drills, joint military drills. We will do further to try to counter that kind of deployment. So I think for South Korea, they need to think very clearly. We do not want South Korea to pick side, either China or US, but they could further understand the seriousness of China's attitude against the SAR deployment.
Professor Yu, you have something to add?
Two fingers response to Professor. You mentioned that Professor Yan Xuetong was a realist. I totally agree with that. But sometimes realists are also idealists, but they don't think realistically. I think in that case, I think Professor Yan's point is just like that. In the case of South Korea as an ally, without thinking about this ally of the United States, in that sense, I think Professor Yan is an idealist. That's my response.
Professor Wang, what do you think?
Okay. As for the red line of the China's policy toward DPRK, I think there are mainly two main red lines we can conclude. The first is I think China, you can say, can endure everything for DPRK, but not another nuclear test. I think it's very, very important. The second red line is I think China definitely do not want to see DPRK regime collapsed. The second question is about SAD. SAD issue, I think if SAD is deployed at last, no matter what kind of style in ROK, I think maybe the country most hurt is ROK. It's ROK. Yeah, just like I mentioned, the relation between China and ROK improved very, very quickly in the past several years. But just like I mentioned earlier, it's the basis for the relation between China and ROK. If deployed, I can imagine economic sanctions, maybe people-to-people relations will be affected. Maybe so far, not so because we are the scholar, not maybe propaganda. From our research, I think from Chinese side, so far we do not want to see such kind of wars because I think from Chinese government, maybe they really want to maintain the quite sound relationship between China and ROK. But really it's very, very serious issue for China.
Great. More questions, please. Oh, on this side. This lady sitting in the middle, please.
My name is Grace Kahn.
There's a mic.
My question is, well, I'm concerned that the ROK China hotline is not so hot. And my question is, what will China do if the DPRK regime collapses? Will it physically take over North Korea, including its nuclear weapons?
Great question. The gentleman next door.
Okay. Bill Jones from Executive Intelligence Review. It was mentioned the Belt and Road Project by Professor Wren and some of the others. It seems to me that this project, which is not as it's described here, simply a Chinese foreign policy gimmick or strategic project, but rather an attempt to create a new paradigm of relationships between nations, also has relevance to the situation in North Korea, given the fact now things are very heated because of the fourth test Nevertheless, there were attempts to try and bring North Korea in the type of economic cooperation which would change the nature of the situation. In particular, the building of the railroad from South Korea to the north, linking up with the Trans-Siberian, which would bring it onto the mainstream of international commerce. There are a number of parties involved in that. That's Russia, South Korea, China, as well as North Korea. And it seems to me, and that includes also the ports that are going to be built with regard to that, it seems to me that this project never really got off the ground sufficiently to have an effect. And I was wondering if we can get over these immediate crises, how would one proceed and what problems have existed between these countries that it really hasn't gone farther than it should have gone?
Okay, another question in the same row.
Michael Seddick, PBS Online News Hour. I think we've set a record here for a Washington conference on Korea to go 1 hour and 45 minutes before the word collapse came up. How much in your discussions, your equivalent think tank academic discussions, to which maybe Westerners are or not invited, do you discuss scenarios for North Korea? What happens if its economy hits X point? What happens if its government hits X point? How serious for your people, the equivalent think tank people in China, is the prospect of a regime collapse?
Yeah,
can I just add to that? Because
yes, please.
if I could just add, because my earlier question was the opposite of a future North Korea. We shouldn't just assume the collapse. What do we do with North Korea that continues? And how would China like to see it develop or evolve? If you could add both.
That's wonderful. Professor Yu, you want to take the lead?
Yes. We do think about all sorts of scenario. If we think of as an international security expert, what we do, any scenarios, Taiwan Strait, India, Pakistan, Korea Peninsula, of course, outside of the peninsula issues, a lot of. But as I mentioned in my talk before, we don't take it as a prerequisite for devising a North Korea policy. I don't know when it will collapse. I think nobody knows. So we need not to put it as a prerequisite for devising a North Korea policies. I think it's maybe longer than most of the people think. As a resilient countries, as isolated countries. When I visit North Korea, my impression is just like China in the 1970s. When I had some experience. It's the elementary school, so it's orderly society. Although there's an obvious shortage of electricity and food, but it will stay longer than most of the people expected if it was right to think about its isolation. So in that sense, I don't think DPRK will follow the advice of the Chinese government to reform and opening up. Reform and opening up, that means the end of this family, the King's family, facing the challenges of a prosperous, strong South Korea. That's a completely different scenarios from the Chinese case. A mainland could reform and open, facing Hong Kong and Taiwan, no problem. But North Korea, you cannot do that. That's my response.
Professor Ren, please.
Okay, I will take the OBOR question. I think just as you mentioned, now the OBOR, we have, after we released the initiative, it has always been 3 years. We see there are not enough tangible results we could see for the past 3 years. But we are still trying to, to work on that. I if you look at the map for the OUR, actually we have several routes, one from China to the Middle Asia, East. One is the maritime road from Quanzhou to South China Sea and to Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, and then to the Mediterranean Sea and go up. Another one is from China to Kazakhstan and then to the east, to the west. These two are the two main focus for the road and belt. The first time we released the map in 2013, we only have those two lines. But last year, when we released another map, we added two lines. We add two roads. One is to the Pacific Ocean, to Australia, New Zealand. I think another route very important to Northeast Asian region, to South Korea and Russia, and then to the west. I could see for all those four routes, the most difficult route is Northeast Asian, the China, South Korea, North Korea, Russia, Mongolia, and this line. But now we are discussing some bilateral projects with South Korea. For the multilateral between China, South Korea, North Korea, and Russia, it will be very difficult because of North Korea situation. But for some bilateral, China, South Korea, I think we are discussing a lot. For example, how we can build maritime routes from the Shandong province to some part of South Korea, and the maritime routes. That's very important. I remember several years ago we discussed about to build an oil line, oil pipe, across from Russia across North Korea, and then south and then by ship to China. But now no one talk about this anymore. So I could see for the OBR now the Chinese government we trying to get more tangible results, and maybe from the bilateral is more and is much easier, and especially the China ROK bilateral cooperation could be made as a very good example for the future development of the OBOR initiative. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Yu has another question.
Of course, Professor Long's question has no, I need to answer. He mentioned twice about the China's long-term vision of the Korean Peninsula. If we don't take the regime caps as preconditions of thinking about Korean Peninsula policy, and how about the future, the long-term design. My impression is that Chinese people are not very good at what the strategic planning in this regard. They are good at the modeling through. If you look at Chinese position on Korean unification, it's always no change, consistent. China support unification on the basis of this kind of if this unification is based on independence, peace, no problem. Of course, we think about all sorts of scenarios, about the refugee scenarios, about the nuclear weapon scenarios. But my hunch is that China has to be involved in this kind of unification process whatsoever. Rule in play. That's my hunch.
Professor Wang will tell us how will China intervene in that scenario.
Yeah, just like I mentioned, I think the relation between China and PRK is very, very important. The reason for China to develop the relationship with DPRK, I can tell you here. I think not because maybe ideology, not because maybe China like DPRK. I think the most important reason is because the bilateral relationship is very, very important for regional stability. So back to your question here. As for the collapse, this issue is really very, very sensitive in China. We usually do not talk about it publicly, but I can tell you maybe in very, very recent years, maybe there may be some discussion here about such kind of scenario among the think tanks. But according to my own information, I think our assessment is maybe this kind of scenario will not happen in the near future. No matter what kind of sanctions, you will pose. We will pose. Secondly, I think the reason I think is just like I mentioned, the relationship for China is very, very important. China, I think China will not will prevent such kind of scenario from happening. Last year, before our political bureau standing committee member Yuanzhe visited Xinjiang. Also, I personally involved in one project is to try to analyze the logic of so-called abandoned DPRK. Maybe the logic and where, or maybe also whether maybe China can abandon DPRK. Our answer is okay. China cannot. Because I think the very, very huge uncertainty for China. I think we are not prepared well.
All three professors mentioned the term regional stability a lot. I wonder how that term is really defined in the Chinese policy lexicon. That regional stability means that China's security, or it actually includes other components as well. Because when you look at regional stability, it is the North Korean provocation that is destabilizing. So what China is basically saying that North Korea can provoke and will punish them, but at the same time, US and South Korea should not respond because that may endanger the regional stability. How do you square the circle there?
For the regional stability, I think for the Korean Peninsula issue, I think from Chinese many scholars, our analyze it like this. We think okay, it is a strategic issue. It's a lot of reasons. It's very, very difficult, very, very complex. So it need more time. We cannot resolve it maybe in the tomorrow or maybe very, very near future. So we need patience. So before that, I think we should create, I think, more conditions to resolve this issue. Really, many scholars in China, we think, okay, just like I mentioned, the most important factor, player to resolve this issue is US. But our conclusion is like this. Maybe you are not willing to resolve this issue. Just like I mentioned from DPRK side, denuclearization, they really want to get a security guarantee and also remove isolation from international community. These two only can be satisfied from US. So from China side, okay, what can we do here? We just, many times from Chinese, we can say China's rule just, how to say, crisis management.
More questions? The young lady over there.
Thank you so much, Teresa Lowe, Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you again for this esteemed panel and for your responses today. My question pertains to UNSCR 2270. You mentioned, piggybacking off of the previous question, the importance of regional stability in the East Asia region and China has maintained that regional stability is of its ultimate interest. That being said, with the tough sanctions from Resolution 2270, sort of how does China balance between putting just the right amount of pressure on North Korea, for example, and enforce the right level of sanctions to get North Korea to comply or come back to the negotiation table, but at the same time, how does it balance the other side of the equation, which is to not push so hard as to drive the regime into collapse? I'm very curious to see what's sort of your insights on how the government balances this equation. Thank you.
Great. Maybe on this side as well. The gentleman followed by this. Okay.
Hello. Oh, sorry. My name is Boo-Hong Hyun from USKI SIS. My question is, the idea of deploying THAAD came out because of DPRK's nuclear program. If China took North Korea's nuclear weapon seriously at the beginning, we wouldn't have faced such issue today. So to make South Korea to give a deploying THAAD in South Korea, what kind of promise or deal that can China make with DPRK and the ROK?
Yeah, John Lemore with pedestrians.org. The U.S. is going to have a new administration next year. Have people been paying attention to what the various candidates have been saying about the possible changes in U.S. policy towards the Korean Peninsula, and what are concerns about that?
Professor Ren, do you want to give a try? Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll take the second question. The North Korea question I'll give to Junsheng. For the THAAD issue, first of all, I think you overestimate China's influence on North Korea. The scenario now is not because of China. The situation now on current is not because of China. North Korea relations is a normal relation, state-to-state relation, is very clear. And in the past few years, China, we trying to use every means to make the stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula. I think that is from ceasefire talks to some other measures. I can feel, I think between 2012, the Chinese way to engage with North Korea is try to make it open up, follow the Chinese way, the reform and open up, and develop its economy, and maybe change its policy orientation. But no, I could again use ideal. It's too ideal. After Kim Jong-un's inauguration, he totally changed his father's policy, and now I could say China, we are still trying to use our own way, and also, it's not only a bilateral, but also we joined the sanction. It's another aspect that China try to play a very responsible role with the international community to tackle the North Korea issue, the nuclear issue. If it's only if hypothesis, if you do not deploy THAAD, from Chinese logic, I think THAAD is not effective for you to counter maybe the future missile attack from the north. The main target maybe it's not only North Korea, but for the X radar, it can cover 1/4 or 1/5 of Chinese territory. It's a direct threat for the Chinese national security. No matter what tangible measures you make, and I know the South Korea friends give many promises to the Chinese counterparts. If we deploy THAAD, we will try to, not to face the Chinese territory. We will only, go direct to the north. Some promises, but from Chinese logic, we don't believe it. Not only because we do not believe South Korea, but we do not believe US. That is my own understanding. That is my own understanding. Because now China, we are facing very heavy strategic pressure from US after the pivot and the rebalance strategy. So we do not want South Korea to be taken or to be used as a front line between the Chinese and between China and the U.S. competition in the Asian Pacific region.
Okay, Professor Yu, any insights to share with us?
Can I answer the third question? Response to the first question. On the second, I think the third question is the possible change of U.S. Korean policy. It should be answered maybe by Alan and the three more properly. My hunch is the policy change, the room for the policy change is limited. It's very limited. North Korean nuclear crisis has lasted for about 1/4 century, 25 years. Which experienced several republic presidency and democratic presidencies. We didn't see any good ideas come out of this in dealing with North Korea. I'm not sure if you have a new president, you will have a new idea or new policy options in this regard. So the nuclear crisis, especially under the new leadership of Tiejun, I think that's kind of a brinkmanship. And it was written into the constitutions. So I don't think we have. Actually, I think President Xi Jinping and President Obama did talk about the coordination of Korean Peninsula issues. I think it's very unusual for President Xi Jinping to talk about this openly. We need to coordinate our Korean Peninsula in dealing with North Korea. But I really don't know how can we coordinate in this regard.
So Professor Wang, how are we going to coordinate?
Okay, for the implementation of 2270, I think we can see, so far we can see, I think China is very, very serious about this. Yeah, according to my knowledge, for the financial, for the economic, for the trade between China and DPRK, I think we have a card, according to this resolution. The second thing I want to mention is, I think before DPRK made a commitment for denuclearization, maybe the relation between two countries, I think only limited to the party-to-party relations. There are some rumors, like Kim Jong-un with China. I do not think that there will happen. Maybe the relation between two countries will only party-to-party.
Oh, great. We're running over time, so why don't we close here? But feel free to approach the Chinese experts for more exchanges of views and questions. Thank you very much for your insights. It was very interesting, and thank you very much for your great questions. Please do stay for the second panel on American and Korean perspective, which will start in about 11 minutes at 2:15. Thank you very much.
My name is Tiejun of Brookings Institution and Wellesley College. And I think this is a hard second act to follow. I'll be very honest that of all the Chinese scholars and government people I've ever heard, especially in public settings, I thought our first panel was absolutely outstanding in terms of their analysis and candor. So I'm very appreciative. I think you gave us a lot to think about and respond to. We have a panel here of responders from the Korean and American perspectives. And I'll just go in order. It's on your, I won't go into a long introduction since papers here have the information. We have Jung-Yeop from Asan Institute for Policy Studies. The headquarters office, as many of you know, is based in Seoul, Korea, and he is representing Asan in Washington. And I guess, Jung-Yeop, you will be the Korean representative in a sense. And then Thomas Byrne, the president of the Korea Society in New York City, is with us. And I don't think you necessarily set it up this way, but it so happens it's Korean American and then Korean American. So with Andrew Yell from Catholic University at the end of the table, but I'm sure that all of you are welcome to address any aspect of the Korea and U.S. Responses, policy ideas as they relate to the first panel. So let's start with Jung-Yeop.
Thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you, Win, for inviting me to give this opportunity for me to speak in front of the panelists. And Professor Moon just mentioned that I'm representing our institute in Washington, D.C., but I'm going back to Seoul at the end of this month. And my colleague James here is going to represent our institute in Washington, D.C. So many colleagues of mine in D.C. are sad because they are losing one of the best drinking buddy in D.C. But don't be sad yet because he is also as alcohol dependent as I am. And one other better thing for him is that you don't need to deal with my accent anymore. Anyway, my role today is to comment on Professor Run's paper today and also give my own thought on Korea-China relations. If you have not read Professor Run's paper, I hope you read it very soon because from my experience, not many papers written by Chinese scholar are these frank and very honest in terms of analyzing the ROK-China relations. And his paper focused much on long-term relations between Korea and China and gives some policy prescriptions for Korea and China for the shorter term. And he gave us four models of how Chinese think of ROK-China relations and how it can be developed in the future. And my comment, and it is a pretty much comprehensive explanation of how China view Korea. But I think Professor Wang's explanation of Chinese view is too much focused on purely bilateral relations between China and Korea. I think much more important factor that determine Korea and China relations is one exogenous variable and one endogenous variable. One exogenous variable is the China-US relations. The reason why our president's visiting Beijing last September was so controversial in DC was totally because that US-China relations was not that good. if U.S.-China relations was good enough to observe our present visit to Beijing, then it should not be that controversial. But as China and the U.S. relations have been deteriorating for last like 5 or 10 years, the way that South Korea navigate between two superpowers are always keenly seen by two superpowers. So I think when you discuss the relations between Korea and China, you always need to consider the U.S. factor into the calculation. And the endogenous variable that I think is South Korea's domestic politics. Korea-China relations have always been dependent on Korea's domestic politics since we normalized our relations with China. So during the Lee Myung-bak presidency, many people criticized that President Lee Myung-bak enhanced the relations with the U.S. at the expense of Korea-China relations. And President Park tried to rebuild our relations with China, and it caused some disputes with the U.S. and Korea. And with the huge defeat of the ruling party in general election, we don't know what will happen next year, December next year. So depending on what kind of president we will have from 2017, the relations between China and Korea will be much more different. And Professor Ron also mentioned, and Junsheng and Professor Yu mentioned of North Korean issues. This is hotly debated topics between China and South Korea. And because of certain things that China argues that this is why we cannot forget North Korea for strategic reasons or other reasons. And I'll tell you some very interesting aspect to see how China should North Korea in the future. So it's like China always criticizes South Korea, which is the close ally of the United States. So China was suspicious of Korea's behavior when it comes to that and other things. And so what's the role of the alliance in the future, right? So I asked this question to the Korean public. So whenever we asked about the support of ROK-US alliance to the Korean public, regardless of their ideological difference or partisan difference, more than 90% of Koreans always support ROK-US alliance. And it's almost the same when we ask whether they support ROK-US alliance in the future, very generally. But when I ask South Koreans whether they will support ROK-US alliance after the unification, it drops to about 70%. That's very important, right? Because normal people usually don't think about whether we should keep ROK-US alliance after the unification, right? When you get the phone call and some lady asks you a question and you just immediately answer, right? So that's how you form the attitude to when you answer the questions for the public forums. So even without many social discussions about the role of ROK-US alliance after the unification, those who said that we need the ROK-US alliance, about 20% point drop when we had a word after the unification. So many people already start to think that ROK-US alliance may not be necessary if the threat from the North Korea is gone. So then what's the better deal for China, right? So when threat from North Korea is gone, now it's better for China to navigate between Korea and the US. You have more room to play with. Not by keeping North Korea, but you just getting rid of North Korea. Now you will seriously make it difficult for Korean thinkers to strategically navigate between China and the United States. And all the presenters my Chinese colleague mentioned that there are so many meetings between President Park and President Xi, but what kind of concrete substances we have, right? And Professor Ron mentioned in his paper that we have hotline between NS's chief, but as far as I know, there was no call between NS's chief even after it was built. So what kind of concrete substance do we have even after those 8 meetings, right? Maybe our president sell a lot of books in Beijing, but what have we really accomplished in substance-wise? So even after President Park visited Beijing September last year, the thing that we got from China is that this is strong opposition about that, right? And we have not heard any concrete word from China about the unification issues. So even if we somehow see that there is some improvement between China and South Korea, but I don't see anything substance, concrete between two countries. And let me briefly speak about that issues. It's not about Korea's having missile defense against North Korea. The reason why China opposed that deployment in Korean Peninsula is because it might be strategically disturbing the relations between China and the US. So whether US military defense has intention and capability to destabilize the strategic relations between China and the US, that's the question. I don't know about the intention. I'm not the US, I'm not the American, I don't speak for US government at all. So I don't know about the intentions. But do we think that the US has the capability to defend against China and Russia's missile attack to the United States? Probably they now have 38 or 44 that, and I don't believe it can defend against China and Russia's missile attacks. And even before, if that's what US can do now, if I'm the US government, I don't want to destabilize the strategic balance based on mutually assured destruction. The reason why we want the missile defense against North Korea is because math is not working against North Korea. Even if we have enough attack capability against North Korea, we don't believe North Korea will be deterred. That's why we need a missile defense against North Korea, and that is why we need a THAAD and other systems. You know that there are a lot of discussions about missile defense, even within Korea, because it might destabilize the strategic balance in Northeast Asia. But as North Korea has developed its nuclear weapons and missile technologies, it's like we even cannot think of what others think, right? We have to protect ourselves in the first place. So if China keeps saying that missile defense in Korean Peninsula is the element of destabilizing the relations between the US and China, it's like too far away discussion for Koreans. We are now having this serious threat from North Korea. And peace treaty. I know that there are discussions of this parallel talk or dual tracks with the denuclearization and the peace treaty. Since we already have the word of peace treaty before, it's not really weird to talk about peace treaty, but what will be there in peace treaty talk is very much important. As far as I know, the North Korea wants from the peace treaty is that they don't want US troops anymore in Korean Peninsula. By having peace treaty, the United Nations force will be gone. That means there will be less reason for United States to be on the Korean Peninsula. So if that's the purpose of peace treaty, then Korean government has to be very hesitant about it until we see very serious development of denuclearization in North Korea. So if China wants to push forward these parallel talks, then it might be a better idea to push North Korea to the direction of denuclearization. In that line, I want to discuss more about the sanctions. We have, after the Secret Council Resolution 2270, you do see that there's a lot of media report that China is much more cooperative than before with the US and Korea in terms of putting pressure to North Korea. And you see that how sanctions will work, right? It's because North Korea's economy is in many cases based on selling these natural resources to overseas and get the cash, and it trickles down to the society. That's why all the markets are there. So if somehow we can block their overseas activities, including selling natural resources to other countries and getting money from other countries, the sanction might work, right? So China said that they are cooperating with the UN sanctions, but let me show these pictures. And UN Secret Council 2270 include this banning of coal and other resources, unless it's for livelihood needs, right? This is the picture that taken by our research partner, Center for Domestic Defense Studies. And this is the tracking of the Chinese-owned Cambodia flagship operating. This is Nampo, Daean, Longkou, and Baocheng in China. And this is from March 30 to like April 27th. This is the satellite image of Daean. And you see these coals. And this ship is getting coals to the ship. You see the coals over there. And this is Longkou, March 30, 2016. You see coals over there. And this is Tiejun. These are all coals. So even after UN sanction banned any movement of coals and iron ores and other natural resources, except for livelihood needs, probably this company and North Korea will say that this is for livelihood needs, right? So if you can say this is the livelihood, what can be sanctioned? Right? So when China has a sincere desire for putting pressure to North Korea when it comes to the denuclearization, we can always discuss very sincerely with China about these kind of sanction activities. Let me start. Thank
you. And now we have Songbird from the Korea Society.
Well, I'd like to thank you and the Stimson Center for inviting me. Bend over to get this right. For inviting me. And I appreciate very much being able to read papers from fellow panelists and the Chinese authors. I did find them full of candor, so that was good.
He's just wearing his high heels, that's all.
Yeah. So, and I have to say the Korea Society is since I'm in the slot representing the American view, particularly in Washington, D.C., I never feel I'm in the mainstream anymore, personally. But the Korea Society is independent and not partisan. So I guess I'm representing an American view here. And I have to say that part of my view is colored from my previous occupation where I was a credit analyst and sovereign risk analyst for Moody's. I just having fairly recently joined the Korea Society. So with that, let me start. Commenting on Professor Wu Tianjin's paper, the significance and position of the Korean Peninsula and Xi Jinping's global strategy. So Professor Yu observes continuity and change in China's foreign policy towards the two Koreas. My reading of the elements that he highlights suggests that there's more change than continuity, and that's what we'll see in the future. Positive versus South Korea, friendly diplomatic ties, expanding economic relations. Now, I came to that conclusion before I stepped into the panel and all this talk about how Thaad would disrupt South Korean and Chinese ties. But still, putting that aside if you can, that's the direction that I see with South Korean and Chinese ties. But negative versus North Korea, with heightened diplomatic strains and rising security risks. Professor Yu notes in his conclusion that what North Korea is doing is endangering China's national security, reputation, and the international non-proliferation regime. And then he asks the question, can China really restructure its Korean Peninsula policy by following international norms to punish North Korea? So I think this is a question that does need answering. And I would say, well, I think you should bring the sanctions. And my personal opinion, or my personal observation, more than my opinion, or both, is that with tighter prolonged sanctions, a dialogue without tighter and prolonged sanctions, dialogue with the North will not lead to an easing of tensions. And therefore, China's security, let alone regional and global security, will only worsen. And the evidence for that, of course, is the tight and prolonged sanctions regime against Iran and Myanmar. I consider to be much tighter than the case with North Korea, perhaps until recently, since the Obama administration slapped the financial sanctions on the whole financial system in North Korea. Under the Bush administration, financial sanctions just affected one small bank in Macau that kept deposits in. But that led to a freezing of financial relations, a cascade freezing globally almost, and had dire effects on North Korea, certainly brought their attention. So I think sanctions would be a necessary condition for getting changing North Korea's behavior, but of course it's not sufficient because the North Korea themselves have to come to a realization, the leadership that is, that they'll have to make a change if they're to have a bright future, maybe a future liberty. So focusing on the North Korea side of the peninsula, aside from the problems posed by the North's nuclear bomb and ballistic missile program, the historical bonds between China and North Korea are weakening, Professor Yu notes. And he cites several examples of this. First, the ideological bond between the CPC and the Workers' Party in Korea. He says that the BP case image is getting worse in the eyes of the average Chinese. I would say North Korea is also testing a shared bond with party leaders in North Korea. Quote from some comments made by Rudiger Frank at 38 North, where so the Workers' Party's Congress was held in North Korea for the first time in 36 years. No official foreign delegations participated in this 7th Workers' Party Congress this time around, and the absence of the Chinese at this year's Congress was noteworthy, according to Rudiger Frank. However, after reading the full text of Kim Jong-il's speech, it seems that the Chinese would not have enjoyed the show anyway if it had showed up. Considering the following passage of Kim Jong-il's speech, and this is a quote, "Despite the filthy wind of bourgeois liberty and reform and openness blowing in our neighborhood, we let the spirit of Song Gun," that's military first doctrine, rifles fly, and advancing according to the path of socialism that we've been chosen. It's hard not to understand that. This is, according to Rudiger, that it's hard not to understand that Pyongyang, or Kim Jong-un, is giving a defiant gesture of disrespect to Beijing in the most undisguised way. So Rudiger concludes that however hard we search for details in Kim Jong-il's speech, the Party Congress did not initiate a new age of reform and openness. On the contrary, it explicitly rejected such a prospect in the leader's rude words towards the Chinese, indicating a historical low point in the bilateral relationship. And I think also indicating that North Korea has boxed itself into a dead end as far as economic development goes. The second point is the bond of geographical circumstances. North Korea's role as a buffer. Professor Yoon notes that for the development of technology and strategic weapon systems, the significance of the DPRK as a buffering state has gradually diminished, as some experts already argued. That seems to make sense to me, but I'll come back to that point in my conclusion. The third is that this notion of China DPRK bond is cemented by their blood friendship forged in the Korean War. But then again, Professor Yu notes that this generation that fought in the Korean War is dying off, and so therefore the memory is becoming diluted. And then fourth is the economic bond, which is an important factor in Sino-DPRK relations. But of course, this is immensely more significant in the DPRK than in China. And I have a slide that just shows you this. Everyone knows this, but it's really glaringly obvious when you look at the numbers. However, the DPRK's escalating nuclear and ballistic weapons development has prompted potentially an increasingly tight economic sanction regime against the DPRK, and this will impede China-DPRK economic cooperation. So what about China's position towards South Korea? Turning to the third section of Professor Yu's paper, he notes that there's a honeymoon going on between China and the ROK, and that the ROK fits into a strategic value to China. Professor Yu notes four aspects that underscore the significance and position of the ROK in Xi Jinping's global strategy. I'll start with the fourth point, and that's the ROK economic partnership. Now, I think this deserves some amplification. Under the presidency of Xi Jinping and Park Geun-hye, the strategic and cooperative partnership between the ROK and the PRC certainly has strength. Economically, China is now the largest trade partner for South Korea, the largest overseas destination, largest overseas investment destination for the ROK. Moreover, in November 2014, the two sides announced the conclusion of a free trade agreement, and Korea became a founding member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank set up in Beijing last November. Now, it's hard to talk about economics without having slides and numbers to show. So I'll over here. So this is the North Korea side. This is North Korea's total trade in goods, and it shows its huge pickup. That's the blue line. And the red line only goes in 2014. That's the total Korean trade. Now, in between the red and the blue is really, that's just about all China. So China accounts for the big upsurge. Now, I attribute this big upsurge to a number of factors. One, this was a period of very rapid growth in China. And it also was the commodity boom in North Korea. It depends on commodities. The previous Jung-Yeop pointed out that anthracite coal is still being shipped to China. And in fact, part of this upsurge was opportunistic for North Korea because Vietnam, which was once the biggest exporter of anthracite coal to China, now is developing its own power generation plants, and so it's commanding a lot of its production. North Korea has stepped in to fill a big part of that shortfall as in trade in anthracite coal coming from China. But what goes up has to come down. So 2015, 2016, there's a slowdown in China. There's a collapse of the commodity prices. And so the rise in trade, additional indications are that it is declining, albeit not to the low levels it was before, but it will be declining. And North Korea, South Korea trade has collapsed with the closing of Kaesong. Of course, that's not in there because Kaesong was closed this year. The next slide. This is the importance of China to South Korea. This is the total share of goods, merchandise trade in South Korea and the major trading partners. The red dotted line is China. You can see that it's immensely larger than the US now, the European Union, and even Japan. So China will remain a major partner for Korea. I think part of it is just explained by proximity factors. Another is explained by, of course, the rise of China. But as we all know, the rapid growth of China in the past, that this will slow down, and perhaps, but the rest of the global economy is also doing poorly. But China may not, on the margin, be as important for South Korea. And then the third slide is this is the global goods trade volume of China, South Korea, and North Korea, and the comparison. So there's South Korea, the red line, and here is North Korea, the bottom line. So you can see the total picture of China trade with North Korea really is insignificant for China, although the first slide I showed you is very significant for North Korea. So what does the Korea, I mentioned about the free trade agreement that Korea signed with China in 2014. What does this mean in terms of presaging or broadening of economic integration in Northeast Asia and the development of the free trade area of Asia Pacific? A lot of this commentary I borrowed from Jeffrey Schott at the Peterson Institute. He notes that the free trade agreement signed by China and Korea governs almost $300 billion in trade, goods and services. All the FTAs concluded by Korea with its major trading partners since the turn of the century, the Korea-China FTA may be the largest in trade terms. However, it is far from the best in terms of the depth of liberalization and the scope of obligations on trade and investment policies. The tariff liberalization involved in the free trade agreement is loaded to the back end, the phase-outs occurring in years 10 to 20. Commitments become less meaningful from a commercial perspective and do not encourage new investment in anticipation of the tariff reforms, at least in the first 10 years. Trade coverage in the near term represents a much lower level of liberalization than Korea negotiated with either the US or the European Union in their free trade agreements. So will North Korea provide the opportunity for economic cooperation between China and South Korea for a peaceful evolution of the DPRK? I think this was embodied this is part of the intention of the South Korea-China FTA, which included the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Noteworthy, this was excluded from the US FTA. Kaesong is not considered to be part of the trading jurisdiction of South Korea. In the short term, Korean manufacturers in KIC would be allowed under the concept of the China-Korea FTA, would be allowed to expand their market to China as well as to South Korea. Since in 2005, only 10% of production of KIC has been exported to third countries. The rest was consumed in South Korea. In the medium term, there is an expectation of foreign investment, particularly from China, in the Kaesong Industrial Zone, with hopes that such FDI will reduce the business risks associated with the Kaesong Industrial Complex. In the longer term, deeper economic integration with North Korea was viewed as a pathway towards reconciliation between the two Koreas. However, following North Korea's fourth nuclear bomb test, President Park chose to take the lead in tightening the international sanctions regime against North Korea and close the KIC. Moreover, although South Korea-China FTA broadened the inclusion of other output processing zones to North Korea's special economic zone, such as Hwasong, which both countries had agreed to jointly develop in 2010, the fall of Junsheng Tech in 2013 has frozen development to those other output processing zones. So political change and complications in North Korea can undermine official agreements with China too. Lastly, the deal, the China FTA deal, is likely be a precedent for what can be done in trilateral China, Japan, Korea FDA talks. The good news is that these talks continue to advance, albeit slowly, despite the political frictions and other aspects of bilateral relations between Japan and its neighbors. The prospective Korea-Japan, China FTA seems unlikely to produce a more integrated economic zone in Northeast Asia. That is one reason why Japan has invested so much effort and political capital in joining the TPP, and why Korea will have to follow suit. It will be the first out of the bullpen, I think, joining the TPP, assuming the TPP is actually put into place. So the China FTA was not a transformational trade agreement, and it probably will not lead to an enhancement of trade and improvement of investment in the region as a whole. Two other aspects of the paper I'd like to talk about, and that is how this fits into the ROK fits into Xi Jinping's global strategy. I think these deserve special mention. First, is China's strategic role in the Great Peninsula. Historically, this has been central, and I think this remains the case as we find out today. In fact, I was just in Seoul the other week, last week, and I noticed in the park in front of me, there was a statue of General Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung is the first 7th century general who unified the Korean Peninsula with the help of Tang Dynasty China. And the next effort to reunify the Korean Peninsula was done after the division of World War II by, of course, the North Koreans with the help of China and the Soviet Union. So it seems like if there is another effort to unify the Korean Peninsula, China will play a central role. So I don't dispute that, and I think that's why this is so important. And then the second point of how the ROK fits into Xi Jinping's global strategy is the strengthening of the China-ROK relations can be useful to offset security pressure from U.S.'s rebalancing to Asia. I thought this was interesting and certainly a Chinese perspective. Thus, it will be good if China could draw ROK closer to its side, giving China more leverage in dealing with the U.S. My understanding, however, at least from an eminent retired ROK government official, and this exchange at an Asia Society Policy Institute seminar in Seoul in February, was that the ROK recognizes China as a regional superpower and probably a future global superpower as well. But at the same time, it recognizes the U.S. as the global superpower. South Korea believes in with both. It's a view that I subscribe to, at least, with China's peaceful rise. And the ROK does not need to choose between superpowers. Perhaps this tad debate or bad debate would change that. Nevertheless, Sino-ROK relations have entered their best period since the two countries formally established diplomatic relations in 1992. And at the same time, ROK-U.S. alliance and bilateral ties are stronger than ever. President Park has strengthened ties, I think, with both China and the U.S., at least that's my observation. And unlike North Korea, South Korea does not aspire to be the second regional superpower, posing strategic risks to China and the U.S. In other words, I doubt South Korea will acquire nuclear weapons on its own. And then lastly, Professor Yu concludes by asking several questions, one of which is, will North Korea become an opportunity for cooperation between China and the U.S., or a new front for divergence? The answer lies in the strategic management capability of China, the U.S., and ROK, of course, regarding the DPR's nuclear weapons program. What I detected was that in the past, at least until the latest North Korean test, that North Korea was one area where the China and the U.S. could agree. However, in the interlude between the test and the UN sanctions 2270, I think some American diplomats and foreign policy analysts were concerned that this would not be an opportunity for cooperation, but rather present friction in the relationship between China and the U.S. Pessimistically, Professor Yu notes that the China-ROK honeymoon would be over if China's security relations with the U.S. and Japan fall into tension. The geopolitical significance of the DPRK to China would be reinforced. So therefore, the thesis that the bond as a strategic buffer is weakening would be proved false, and that the strategic buffer of North Korea would outweigh or would trump the strong economic relationship developed between the ROK and China, and also over China's distaste for North Korea's nuclearization and potential proliferation. So we could be back at Professor Run's 4 schools, in which case a traditional school is the dominant school. Coming from my previous background, I would say we're entering or have entered a period of geopolitical risk on rather than geopolitical risk off. Thank
I speak from here, or do I go up?
Up to you.
Actually, can I speak from here, or do I have to use? Sure. Well, I'd like to thank the Stimson Center for inviting me to comment on some of these papers. I'm also glad that Kathy started out by clarifying that I am Korean American, but the last name like Yo, I usually have students guessing whether I'm Korean or Chinese of descent. So to take away the suspense of where I fall in the debate, I'm neither. As you mentioned, I am a Korean American from the Midwest. So just to comment on the papers briefly, I agree that the tenor of the ROK-China relationship over the past few years has significantly improved, but with this 4th nuclear test, it does leave this question of whether this nuclear test is just a hiccup or a speed bump in developing South Korea-China relations, or whether it's something that's going to derail the future relationships. I think that is worth considering, but I was tasked with commenting specifically on Professor Wang Junsheng's paper on DPRK's 4th nuclear test and the Korean Peninsula situation from the Chinese perspective. So a lot of my observations come from this paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some brief observations about China's position on North Korea, and then I'm going to provide or give some pushback to Professor Wang, just some issues that I thought needed some clarification. So I'll give a couple comments related to that, and then I'll wrap up talking about a little bit about how we might be able to move forward. What I see here is some differences in the Chinese perspective in looking at the North Korea test and how Seoul and even Washington look at this issue. Okay, so the 3 observations that I want to make based on the paper are, I'll just list them and then go over them specifically. But the first is Chinese clear opposition to North Korea denuclearization. The second point I'm going to talk about is Chinese attitudes towards THAAD. And the last point I'll mention is gaps and perceptions regarding insecurities facing both North and South Korea. So based on Professor Wang's paper, it's very clear that China is opposed to North Korean nuclear proliferation. So that's a common starting point. But the source of tension between South Korea and China rests on the strategies and tactics which might best achieve denuclearization. I think this is a terrific graphic because what complicates the path to denuclearization and widens the gap for mistrust between Seoul and Beijing is that Sino-Korea issues intersect within the larger structural boundaries of US-China relations. So I think this is a perfect graphic, these gears, and clarifying that relationship and the complication of this problem, even though both Seoul, Beijing as well as Washington clearly agree that nuclear proliferation is not the path forward for Pyongyang. The second observation I have has to do with THAAD. I know we've already discussed this at quite some length this afternoon. But this, reading Professor Wang's paper, I didn't realize how heavily this weighed on the minds of Chinese analysts, Chinese government officials, in relation to adopting UN Security Council Resolution 2270. But it weighed in the direction, I think, in the opposite of what many analysts here in the US and in South Korea have been arguing. So for, after the fourth nuclear test, a lot of the discussion about THAAD was that, oh, well, Chinese are now on board because we've pushed the Chinese on this hot button issue. There are certain issues that are really easy to annoy and anger your counterpart, and for this, it was really bringing up THAAD and missile defense in the Asia Pacific. And from what I've been reading, this was actually a really smart strategy for Seoul to bring this up, because it really was a wake-up call for China and to adopt these resolutions. But reading Professor Wang's paper, his interpretation is actually quite the opposite. He said that the delay in China's implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2270 is precisely because Seoul had brought up THAAD. And this is different from what many Korean and American analysts, including myself, had been arguing. So I thought that was a really interesting point. My third and final observation is the gaps in both the interests and perceptions regarding security claims between North and South Korea. And based on just this paper, it's very clear that China's strategic interests are still very much aligned to North Korea and not South Korea, regardless of what's been happening on the economic front between Sino-South Korea relations. So China believes that Seoul and Washington do not seriously consider North Korea's security needs. And so this is really at the root of North Korea's nuclear motivations, because they have these insecurities. And Professor Wang points out, I think rightly so, that perhaps it's not completely understood where these insecurities come from. And so obviously if the US and South Korea are participating in joint exercises, this makes North Korea feel a bit nervous. And so it's hard to persuade North Korea to go on the denuclearization path when they feel that there are all these hostilities, when North Korea feels that there are these hostilities directed at them. But I would counter and say that Beijing also doesn't fully consider or understand South Korea's own increasing insecurity, especially in light of this fourth nuclear test. And it's not just because of this nuclear test. If you look at this from a longer term window, perhaps from 5-6 years out, if you remember when you had this incident when a naval frigate, or when the corvette, the Cheonan was sunk, this is 2010, you remember that Beijing didn't take a stand against North Korea despite compelling evidence. Or following a nuclear test or missile test, Beijing's general position within the Security Council is to, it's generally to, it's seen as not really getting on the ball with these sanctions. It's really hard. We really have to pull the Chinese along to convince them to be a part of the sanctions, regime. And most recently, it's with the fourth test, there is this delay in communicating directly with Seoul. Now that's something that Professor Wang mentions, that's something that China could have taken into consideration. But again, these actions, they do leave questions to whether Beijing really understands South Korea's own growing insecurities. And finally, on this point with THAAD and South Korean insecurities, I was actually surprised when we had South Koreans coming here in Washington in the spring, and they kept bringing up the topic of extended deterrence. They're actually not, they're insecure to the point where they're not sure whether the US would commit to the nuclear umbrella to extended deterrence. I think that's misplaced. I think the US is committed but that just shows, that at least showed me how sensitive these issues were. And so so for China to shift the issue of THAAD from one of South Korean security to one about a threat aimed at itself, I think that really, that's also something that suggests to South Koreans that maybe Beijing hasn't taken South Korea's security insecurities serious enough. So for those reasons, I think Seoul, and by extension Washington, would want to see more concrete action from Beijing, not just rhetorical statements, but they want to see more concrete actions that Beijing is truly committed to denuclearization. Now, some specific comments on the paper for Professor Wang. It's really just two. One has to do, it goes back to the issue of China's commitment to sanctions. So I do think we have to give some credit to the Chinese that over time that they have adopted trade sanctions. They have reduced, in certain periods, reduced energy supplies to North Korea. And I think it's evident that even the Chinese are frustrated, if not outright angry, that North Korea has marched along on this nuclear path. But it's not clear to me whether China has, as Professor Wang quotes, a good record regarding implementation of North Korea sanctions, as claimed in the paper. Because as I mentioned before, in Seoul and Washington, there's a strong consensus that China has been rather reluctant to implement sanctions tightly. Just 10 years ago, when North Korea had its first nuclear test in 2006, they adopted UNSCR 1718, but it was adopted only after revisions for removing requirements for tighter sanctions beyond targeting luxury goods was taken into effect. So there's always been some reluctance on the part of the Chinese. And you also have to remember that parts of the North Korean economy are very much tied to Chinese markets, especially the informal sector. So, and it's not clear how much China has been enforcing these sanctions and the loose. It's hard to regulate things in the informal market or informal sector. But again, it's not clear how committed the Chinese have been to the enforcement of sanctions, not only just its adoption. So it might be helpful to clarify if you, I mean, the paper is already published, but if you were to give another talk or some discussions, it might help to give some specific examples or evidence to indicate how China has actually applied or enforced sanctions, if you're going to make that claim that China's been pretty good about the implementation of these sanctions. The second point that I want to just push you back on is this thinking about regime change, or the strategy of regime change, which you think exists within Seoul and Washington. The regime change discourse hasn't really been around since the end of the Bush administration, and I think the Obama administration has tried really, really hard to just get rid of that language, that discourse. But that doesn't mean that there are individual policymakers who still think that at the end of the day, regime change may be the best bet for ending North Korea's nuclear program. But I say this because in Seoul and Washington, sanctions are also a means, not an end, for U.S. and ROK strategy and in response to North Korea's nuclear program. If you were to rank order preferences of outcomes, probably regime collapse would be fairly low in that rank order of preferences. There's clearly, I think, Seoul and Washington would prefer North Korea to come to the table and to negotiate a path forward in an next nuclear program, rather than having this collapse scenario, which leads to, it can open up a whole new can of worms, a whole new problems, which are quite unpredictable. If anything, I assume that policymakers prefer predictability than unpredictability. So, Seoul has really tried to crank up the sanctions. It's really putting the pressure on Beijing like it never has before. But like Beijing, it's to punish and signal its anger to North Korea. It's not necessarily to squeeze it to the point of regime collapse. It's also in hopes of bringing Pyongyang back to the negotiating table. So that's actually a point of that's actually a common point with Beijing. So there might be some room for discussion or dialogue between China and South Korea on that issue. Okay, so the path forward. So I think the penultimate point of Professor Wang's paper is that we should be following this dual track approach of raising the issue of a peace treaty as well as moving forward on denuclearization. And I absolutely agree with him that sanctions alone will not force North Korea to denuclearize. And so this is a good starting point for discussion for all parties concerned. But for me, I'm not sure if this dual track can be approached simultaneously because Seoul has its own security concerns. We have to remember that the state that's intent in pursuing nuclear weapons is currently North Korea, not South Korea. And so the hope is, again, to bring these hard sanctions on North Korea, to bring it back to the table. Now the question is, it was posed earlier, but I think it's a terrific question of how much and what is the right pressure point to bear on North Korea to bring them back to the table. And I think that's where we see the gap. I think China thinks that we can't do too much or else it's going to collapse, whereas Seoul and Washington really believe that China can do more. And so I think China plays an important role in bringing about peace on the Korean Peninsula, perhaps more so than it is willing to admit. But I think that's why a forum like this is really constructive, because we see where the misperceptions lie. And the papers are quite frank in what the Chinese views are. And so we can see where these gaps in perceptions are. And I think that's always a good place to begin when we have dialogue and figuring out the solution. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much to all our panelists. Before I open up to the floor, I want to add a couple questions to our panelists, which you don't have to answer right away, but we can go to the audience, but it's to keep in mind if you feel so moved. And also a couple points of comment. When Dr. Wu talked about gave his presentation and South Korea feeling stuck between China and the United States, the exogenous factor, the U.S.-China relationship being an integral part of the South Korea-China relationship. My own take on this is, and I just put it out there, that sometimes South Korea, I think, conjures up too much of a fear of being caught and trapped in the middle than is really the case. So how much of South Korea psychological, if you can call a national mindset psychological makeup, leads it to feel so pressed and torn between the two larger powers? And so directly speaking, how much of the exogenous relationship really is real versus more in the minds of South Korea's policymakers, leaders? During that time when South Korea was trying to make up its mind whether to have President Park go to Beijing, we had many South Koreans coming to Washington. They were all obsessed with this question of what do the Americans think. And frankly, the Americans, it's a big power. America is not going to cry because the South Korean president goes to China. And of course, we know that the South Koreans would give a lot of information back. So I think some of it was overplayed and unnecessarily messed up both China-South Korea relations and U.S.-South Korea relations. So I think South Korea has to be careful not to create problems where it doesn't have to have problems. Second is that I think your comment, Jung-Yeop, on the changeability of the U.S. alliance and domestic public opinion in South Korea is very, very important, especially because in the Obama-Park partnership, we keep hearing about how wonderful the alliance is, how strong, how robust. It's never been better. Well, to tell you the truth, that's not really true. I know that presidents all have to do this when they meet, et cetera, but we have had previous, heads of state of both countries be very much in sync and have excellent relations. But the point here is we also have had lousy relations between the US and South Korea. And I promise you, it will happen again. We should never take the US-South Korea relationship for granted. Because when I recall, I was doing book research at the time in the early 2000s. Under George W. Bush, the US-South Korea relationship was one of the worst. And people really wondered whether it would ever be healed. And what President Obama's administration was able to do was focus on rebuilding that relationship. So it brought back the US-ROK relationship from down in the doldrums, in the dungeon, back to now, or up to this strong, robust relationship. It could go down the other way again, and I'm looking at possibly if Trump were to be president. I have no idea what any of these relationships would be, but more importantly, when Bush was president, with Roh Moo-hyun as president in South Korea, the two just did not get along. And it's important to keep in mind that anti-US sentiments were flying high, so much that people seriously wondered if domestic public opinion would threaten the alliance. And simultaneously, pro-Chinese sentiments were increasing. In Korean, it was called Jungpung in the early 2000s, and in Chinese, it's Zhongfeng. And people were high on China and Chineseness and Chinese things, and the Chinese reciprocated by being high on South Korean products, etc. So we should not take it for granted that what we see now is what we're going to see in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Within the last 10, 15 years, 10 years, we've seen a pretty dramatic change in both US-ROK relations and China-South Korea relations. The last bit here is that no one on this panel has mentioned US domestic opinion as a factor in any of the relationships we're talking about. And I only bring that up because, because Jung-Yeop had mentioned South Korean domestic opinion being a factor in the various foreign relations. And then the panel before us mentioned Chinese domestic opinion and how it might influence or be a receptor for the changing dynamics between China and North Korea. So if anybody wants to take that up, I just throw it all out there. So we'll take questions. I'll take 3 at a time, and then we'll give our panelists a chance to respond. Yes, back there.
Albert Nabiulan from AAAS.
Can you stand up?
Yeah, my question is directed to Mr. Byrne. You briefly mentioned the Asan Free Economic Zone. 2 parts. First, have there been any further developments since 2013? And if there are further developments in the zone in terms of infrastructure and multilateral involvement, how does this square with the recent UN resolution 2270? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take 2 more. There's one in the middle.
Hi, my name is Grace Kahn of the Institute for Korean American Studies. My question is, given the fact that the DPRK has repeatedly made it clear that they will never denuclearize, including putting it in the Constitution, could the United States ever accept a verifiable nuclear freeze by North Korea in which they agree to stop testing, stop developing, and allow for inspections that show that they've frozen their efforts? Could that ever be a possibility instead of expecting denuclearization?
Thank you. Any others? We'll take one more. Otherwise, we'll go to the panelists. Okay.
That's really tough question, so it's good. That's really tough question, so let's do it.
Why don't I just go down the table from Andrew on either or both?
Okay, I'll respond to the second question about denuclearization. And yes, that is the question. Can the U.S. accept at least a nuclear freeze? And at the moment, and from all statements that have come out from the past, the current and the previous administration, I would say the answer is no, because they also, it's not just about it's just not just about North Korea, but it's also the non-proliferation regime. And for years, you talk about not letting North Korea get the bomb, and then suddenly you're saying, well, we might be okay with it as long as as long as they're willing to, verifications and monitoring. That said, you never say never to anything, so we don't really know. The problem right now is with North Korea's own intent. It's signaled very clearly that it wants to have the bomb, and it may use it. It has a legitimate reason to use it. It's threatened. If the rhetoric or the discussion begins to shift within North Korea, maybe there might be some officials somewhere down the road that might be open to it. But the way things currently stand, I don't think the U.S. would be able to accept that. I don't speak for the U.S. government, but that's just my opinion.
Anyone else?
Well, I mean, this is something, of course, I think we all have been thinking about. I would phrase it as denuclearization, take it from a different angle, the possibility of North Korea accepting to abandon its nuclear weapons. Just because it's in the Constitution doesn't mean anything to me, because this is a Constitution that wasn't written by James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. I mean, you have, in the spectrum of institutional strength, you have the rule of law on one end, put Singapore there, and the U.S. a little behind Singapore. And on the other end is the systems that have a cult of personality, and that's North Korea. China has moved away from its cult of personality. It did it really quickly after Mao's death in '76, because the 11th Party Congress, I think, was a year later or something like that. And there was no more cult of personality. So if North Korea can have a regime change, internal regime change, where it replaces the Kim dynasty, so it's no longer a cult of personality, but yet it remains a DPRK, then I would say there'd be a chance that North Korea could be convinced to give up its nuclear weapons, because perhaps it could get more rationality, certainly economic rationality, in the decision-making in North Korea.
There was the other question.
Oh, yeah, Rason, yeah. My information on that only goes through 2015. So I don't think activity in those zones has really picked up. And for the sanctions, I guess that's one of the zones that is exporting textiles. That was one of the few new industries that, from Chinese investment that North Korea was developing. But for the sanctions to be effective, they really have to crimp the rare earth, and particularly the anthracite, the raw material and mineral exports from North Korea, because that's the biggest single export from North Korea, and it's still going to China. So that's the real, I think that's the real chokehold, whether China will, how much China will tighten down on that. And there's just not enough time to tell. There was a surge in anthracite exports to China from North Korea in March to beat the sanctions. And then in April, a fairly significant drop, not as great as the year on year, but there were other cycles in the past that weren't politically determined in shipments and calls. So I really don't have a good answer, just an historical answer, but I would focus on that. And also the financial sanctions, I think, are very critical, because they could affect second parties. The Obama administration declaring the whole financial system of primary money laundering concern is very sweeping, much more stringent than under the Bush administration. Fairly limited actions, which will also have repercussions. So I would focus on those two.
Okay, we have, we'll take another round, and I'd just like to also remind our Chinese panelists that we would really welcome your feedback and to have the genuine dialogue that the conference is meant to be. Gil.
Gil Rosman, the Asan Forum. I too would like to hear the Chinese responses to these statements, which were refutations, really, of the Chinese presentation in the Chinese papers in some regard. So, for instance, and particularly the updating to May and June. So Thomas Byrne said May was a low point. Statements made at the Party Congress in North Korea. Well, how did the Chinese interpret the Party Congress? Was this seen as insulting to China, or was it seen as the beginning of North Korea trying to deal with its problems in a more positive way? Also, what is the reaction to the U.S. financial sanctions? Can you bring us up to date on that? So we really have the impression here that we have a sharp disagreement between the outside presenters and the Chinese presenters, and bringing us up to date will help us understand this difference.
Thank you. And I think there are differences of opinion, but I don't think they're terribly sharp. So we'll, yes, we have a question there.
Hi, this is Anna Cho from Public International Law and Policy Group. I have a question for Mr. Byrne and Yeop. So the previous Chinese panel said China wants the ROK to take into account more of China's geostrategic interests, and but not necessarily choosing a side between China and the U.S. And I take that as a call for South Korea to take more autonomy in dealing with North Korea's nuclear programs, and take the third role apart from being an ally of the U.S. or being an ally of China's policy. So how do you evaluate current South Korea's role in light of this regard, in light of this view? And do you think South Korea's autonomy in dealing with North Korea's nuclear program will benefit the current U.S.'s strategy toward North Korea in any way? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll ask our panelists to address that question, and then I also would like to give Professor Yu a chance to contribute.
I'll pick up on the question that was just raised about South Korea taking a more independent or autonomous stance on dealing with nuclear issues. So there was one period within brief history where South Korea did take its own independent approach, at least relative to the United States, and that was during the Kim Dae-jung and then first half of the Nobuyan administration, and it was somewhat disastrous in the sense that there wasn't much coordination on the part between. Let me backtrack. There was coordination, but the intentions were different. South Korea was pursuing this engagement approach towards North Korea, whereas the United States had taken on a hard line approach, and so in some ways they were undercutting each other. So for South Korea to take this autonomous stance, I think apart from the United States, I think it would create confusion in terms of policy, and not just between U.S. and South Korea, but even among other players. So I know, for instance, China really would like to have the six-party dialogue resume, and if you don't have Seoul and Washington on the same page, it makes it very difficult to proceed even taking a multilateral approach. So yeah, I think there should be strong coordination between Seoul and Washington on this issue, and yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Tom?
Yeah, the question reminds me of educating myself down here in DC. I went to CSIS, and Wendy Sherman made the comment at this event that the reason the Iran sanctions worked, at least in terms of the implementation, we'll see whether they work over the long run, was that the negotiators had set the table. So the negotiations were actually fairly straightforward, but the preparation of getting everyone on board a unified position was crucial. And I would say that's the same thing here, that if one country takes the lead, but the other key country, either China or the US, is not in sync with that, with South Korea's lead or desire to take the lead, then North Korea will exploit the differences and the gaps, and the sanctions won't have any effect. And my observation and opinion is that I think sanctions are necessary to focus the attention of a government that its actions will not be viewed favorably by the international community and that there will be serious repercussions if it continues.
Thank you. Jung-Yeop wants to add a comment.
With regard to your comment on the alliance management issues and the U.S. domestic opinions on ROK-US alliance. In 2012, there was a public opinion poll by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. They asked a question about whether U.S. public support maintaining the U.S. troops overseas in Korean Peninsula even after the unification of Korean Peninsula. And very surprisingly, I think it was around like 60% of U.S. public support maintaining troops in Korean Peninsula. And the reason is because they want to, U.S. public think maintaining U.S. troops is part of checking China's rise in Northeast Asia. So as I mentioned, that Korea's perception of ROK-US alliance will be decreasing after the alliance, but many U.S. publics still think that maintaining U.S. troops on Korean Peninsula is necessary because of China. So that might be some point that U.S. and Korea interests might diverge. And with regard to the Korea's state dating between two superpowers, one of the things that I really hate hearing from Korea's news is that South Korea has love goals from two superpowers, right? So we can take advantage of their situation to our interest. So in what situation, right? When AIAB comes up, right? First reaction from the US was very negative. Eventually US backed off, right? Because US see that they see that Korea will eventually join the AIAB and there is no any rationale for blocking Korea and the other US allies to joining the AIAB. And for that, I think China puts too much stake on this because as you all Chinese panelists agree today that it will be deployed, pretty sure. Then I think what is China really going to do if that is deployed? If you put too much stake on that, what can you do, right? It's not the end of the relations between China and South Korea. And you will see this is coming, then probably this might be the political rhetoric, but you have to have some kind of political action to get out of this situation. But from Korea's point, we always have this dilemma that whether our president needs to go to Beijing in September last year, and what kind of things that we should do between two superpowers. So whenever I hear from the news that some Korean experts say that we have these love points and we can take advantage of the situation. So what situation, right? You have never answered when AIAB that comes up. They always say, oh, we have to navigate between two superpowers. So I don't know, maybe you can understand.
No, I don't believe they're love calls. I look at Korea as in Korean, it's called 짝사랑, always worrying that it loves the other country more than the other country loves it. So it's a reverse psychology. Anyway, we'll move on to less amorous conversations. And Professor, if you would.
Just a couple of response to Professor Byrne and also Professor Roseman's question, and also Dr. Wu's comments. In the relations, I agree that China's assessment of ROK's role of offsetting the U.S. Might be too a kind of wishful thinking on Chinese side, considering the reality of the USA ROK alliance and the ROK elites, they're pro-Americans. But if we think about just to reduce the strategic pressure, instead of not dragging the ROK from the American side, but just to reduce the strategic pressure. I mean, not aiding the ROK forces on the American side. It might be a kind of a plausible, reasonable way of thinking. If we can keep a good relations with the ROK, that would be better anyway. So that's my brief response. Professor Rosenberg mentioned about the May and the June, this period, the party congress of DPRK. We don't know much about, we don't pay a lot of attention to this party congress, just like we don't pay a lot of attention to the DPRK constitutions. But we do know they didn't say good words to the China in the party's congress. So you can find Chinese lukewarm, if not cold response during the discussion of President Xi Jinping and the DPRK delegation. President Xi Jinping didn't repeat the denuclearization as before, but he just mentioned, all sides should be self-restrained, should be calmed down, such kind of words. So I don't think there is it become better than before. This is just still pretty cold bilateral relations. Dr. Wu's comments, yes, I agree that President Xi Jinping and President Park had met 8 times, but doesn't mean much. If they didn't tackle the substantive issues, but considering the Oriental culture, leadership is very important. Just meeting is also important, I think, for the 2 countries, considering the bad situation in the Korean Peninsula. And I don't think we cannot expect this kind of meeting could lead to China's, make a clear support to the unification issues put forward by President Park. I think that's too much expectations on the Chinese side. It's too early, actually, frankly speaking. Chinese side response to the proposal of President Park's, we think it's too early to talk about unification at this kind of stage. And what else? So I will answer here, I forgot.
Thank you. And then we also have Professor Wang.
Okay, firstly, many thanks for Andrew Yu. Your explanation, I think, is very bad. It is very better than my own. For my paper. 2 responses. The first is for our case increase in security. I think even for US, I think we share the same, very similar opinion about this. Maybe the biggest main difference is how to resolve, how to realize security. It seems like for US or for ROK, we will think sanctions. The sanction maybe is the best way. But from China side, we think, okay, the sanction is very necessary. But at last, if we want to resolve this question, this issue, we have to come back, negotiate table. We have to discuss. So from Chinese side, okay, we always maybe put forward maybe some suggestions, such as the very newest suggestion is the peace treaty talk. Even for the southern issue, because we we think, okay, this is not maybe useful for resolving this issue, because maybe we can imagine such as today, we can say it is very lot of controversial. Yeah, we have a lot of for the South Asia, who will benefit? I think the DPRK. So this maybe I can conclude maybe the main differences between China and ROK and the US, maybe 2 points. The first point is how to resolve this issue. The second is, maybe Southern issue. The second comment is about the regime change. Regime change, we have a lot of discussion recently with ROK colleagues. We also think maybe it's very good suggestion, but the question is how to realize. I think it's not unreal. It is unreality. As for Peking policy toward this, maybe many Chinese scholars think maybe Peking policy toward the DPRK maybe is one to maybe realize regime change. Maybe in the first several years, we very smart. She wants to get the support from China and the US. But after the fourth nuclear test made by DPRK, we can see today maybe she want to get the support from the international community. Recently, Peking visited Africa. Yeah, everywhere we can see he want to squeeze DPRK's space in the world. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And our dear leader, our gentle dear leader, Yun, has signaled to me that we will have Professor Ren give comments, and then I'll turn over the microphone to Alan Robert.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wu, for your kind comment on my paper. I just have there 2 short response. First one is I don't think we could be too pessimistic about China-South Korea relations. If we take the current situation into consideration, after the 4th nuclear test, we have a very hot discuss in China. Which country is the biggest loss? I could say China and South Korea. For North Korea, I think that is what their logic. And for US, they use this opportunity to deploy SART in Korean Peninsula. But for China and South Korea, I think our relations have a big problem after those provocations. So I want to say we could be more positive, more rational, and to try to reinforce at least our 2 leaders. The exchange of the visit will be very important for us to build the mutual trust. And my second point is about the sanction. I just read the news recently released. The Chinese we arrested North Korea smuggler in Dandong province, and because of his doing something with a banned substance, we detained him and get $4.75 million US and gold bars from his house. It's only from the news because yesterday the press asked the spokesman of the foreign ministry. I think it's still not very clear the situation. But I could say only 1 week after Li Zhuyong's visit to China, we have such kind of behavior, or that shows China's responsibility to keep the sanction on. And for South Korea, for US friends, don't be worried. Many people ask me whether after the North Korea's Party Congress, China will lose our sanctions, but I don't think so. We will stick to our words. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists on this panel, earlier panel, and I'd like to turn it over to Alan Romberg, the director of the East Asia program of the Stimson Center.
We're running short on time, so I will try, maybe I'll speak a little faster. First of all, I appreciate being part of this presentation. I think that the two panels have been really very informative and very helpful in thinking through these very difficult issues. I'm not going to comment on the specific papers. I may make some comments which are related to them, but that's not my main purpose. But I do want to make some general comments as well. First of all, from a U.S. perspective, I think we should keep in mind that cooperation on North Korea with China, it was at one point sort of what I used to call a poster child of U.S.-China cooperation. That may have been an exaggeration, but it was sort of the way everybody talked about it. But after 2010 and the Junsheng and Yuanzhe, no, it became very contentious. You remember that you had President Obama coming out of a meeting with Hu Jintao talking about willful blindness. Conditioned and constrained by its strategic placement of North Korea within its policy, I also think it's fair to say that China has often looked at cooperation with the U.S. on North Korea in a sort of a transactional way. The question was, why should I help you on North Korea if you don't help me on ABC? During the Chen Shui-bian administration, Taiwan was Taiwan. B was at the time of the Senkaku Diaoyu issue coming to the fore, Japan, and C now is somewhat on South China Sea. And I think this is a fundamentally flawed approach because I think that China has some fundamental interests in dealing with the North Korean issue. And we've heard that today from both Chinese presenters and our other commentators. I think that attitude does reflect, however, a reality, which is that China really does want to get rid of North Korea's nuclear program, but I would argue, substantially higher priority for China is making sure that there is no chaos, no war, but also no unification. I think that Professor Yu's point is right on the mark. I don't think China is ready for unification because it looks on unification under South Korean leadership, which I think it would be, allied to the United States, which I think would still be the case, as strategically disadvantageous in some substantial measure to China. Some people, and this has been discussed, seem to think that South Korea is open to unification without the alliance. Nothing's forever, I guess, but I don't think that's a realistic approach in any foreseeable future. So the issue for me, which is a harder issue in a way, is whether China can be persuaded that, as I actually believe to be the case, neither South Korea nor even the US represents a strategic threat to China, and that the alliance does not represent a strategic threat to China. You need a process to try and convince China, or at least air that issue, and it's got to be a reciprocal discussion. Not just about the peninsula, though it must include the peninsula, but about the larger relationships, basically between China and the United States. In the meantime, if China finds U.S. actions toward North Korea discomfiting to date, and this all started well before that, you can go back a number of years and look at U.S. deployments, South Korean deployments, Japanese, that China has been very unhappy with. Then I think Beijing needs to think about what the consequences will be if and when North Korea acquires the capability to target the United States with nuclear weapons. Because in my view, the US response will not be, as some think, the U.S. sort of distancing itself and walking away from extended deterrence, I think it's going to become even more active. And it's likely to go beyond economic sanctions. I'm not suggesting invasion, but I am suggesting there are other measures that would come into play. By the way, on THAAD, the capabilities, the issue as discussed today was sort of capabilities. I think Professor Grant said, our impression is it's really not useful against North Korea, but it is against China. That's not my understanding, but in any case, the U.S. has offered to talk to the Chinese government about the capabilities, technical discussions. And China says, no, it's not a technical issue, it's a political issue. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say it's a threat to us militarily, but then refuse to talk about it and say, oh no, it's a political issue. I'm not saying this to you, but I am saying it to the Chinese government. It doesn't compute to me. As in Southeast Asia, China seems to hold the view that the U.S. in Northeast Asia is essentially an outsider, even an intruder. I think this is not a view that will prosper, and if they really want to, if the Chinese authorities really hold that view, I think they need to think hard about it. Northeast Asia is a vital national interest area for the United States in all dimensions, I would argue, and I don't see that changing. And I think Beijing really does understand the treaty commitments are serious, but I think that it somehow there is still this notion that we don't belong there and it's none of our business. I'm not sure whether China fully understands the importance of treaty commitments and what that would mean if North Korea were to, in fact, provoke, especially at a time when it might have, and I think it someday will have, capability to attack the U.S. with nuclear weapons. On North Korean-Chinese relations, I understand the history, but I'll be very blunt in saying I don't think that the relationship today is based on ideology. Maybe the International Department thinks so, but beyond that, I don't think that's what it's based on. I think it's based on strategic calculation. Not only on the one hand, what chaos or even war would do to threaten China's own interests, but also, as I said before, because I think Korean unification under South Korean leadership allied with the United States is perceived as a strategic defeat, if that were to happen. What's really disturbing to me a bit about, again, not so much necessarily the presentations today, but what I understand China's position is sort of a misreading. Andrew talked about this a little bit, of American policy, American goals. And I'm concerned that the summits that we have had with China have not really corrected those misreadings. We know the last time that the two presidents talked a lot about North Korea, but I'm not sure how far we got, and I think the discussion today indicates that there are still these limits. My view is that the problems, that in one of the papers it talked about how the only real problem between China and North Korea is the nuclear issue. But I think the fact is that no other issue is going to move China to do anything substantial with North Korea, except maybe outright aggression. But the issue, the nuclear issue, has a lot of ramifications. And so even if it's the only issue at the point, at this point, it is an issue at this point. Also, as I say, I don't think THAAD is designed, as was stated again in one of the papers, to drive a wedge between China and South Korea. I think it is a genuine defensive weapon. And I know the radars are a concern, but I think it's going to continue to be viewed by the U.S. and South Korea in that one. On dual track, frankly, personally, I don't have any problem with the concept of both peace negotiations and nuclear negotiations, essentially on two conditions. There are probably more I'm not thinking of. One, as Professor Wang said, North Korea has to commit to denuclearization as its goal going in. And second, it has got to be clear that no peace accords will be concluded, even if there's negotiation. They will not be concluded until the nuclear issue is settled. No one's going to sign a peace accord or peace arrangement with North Korea that is pursuing a nuclear or has a nuclear weapons program. At one point, of course, the U.S. was willing to normalize up to a point, and that went back into the 90s, but North Korea didn't have what it has today. They threw away that opportunity, but in any case, it's a different world today. On the question about denuclearization versus a freeze, if you posed your question not as an alternative, either you have the freeze or you have denuclearization, but is it a way station potentially on the way to denuclearization? I'm not sure that that's not a reasonable issue to discuss, but it is not an acceptable final outcome or goal. And so I don't know if Andrew would disagree with that, but
I agree.
You agree. I also think there was discussion about exercises. I don't think that the U.S. and the ROK are going to lower their military preparations in this era, basically. North Korea has done a lot. It's committed a lot of provocations over time. This is not just a nuclear issue. And I don't see the alliance lowering its guard in that respect. Also, maybe repeating myself, the notion that South Korea could be lured away from the alliance. I would say even with economic pressure that Professor Yu just talked about a bit is something of a fantasy. There are issues in the alliance, obviously, but I think that it is a firm fixture in our relationship. I actually take a somewhat different interpretation from Jung-Yeop about the drop in the poll. I say, okay, 93% support now, but it's still 2/3, even after unification, according to that poll. So, okay, it's a 20-some-odd% drop, but it is still 2/3 of Korean people saying we want that alliance even after unification. I think that's pretty significant. On regime change, by the way, it is not U.S. policy. But I think that a lot of people believe that only with regime change you can resolve the nuclear issue. So there's a tension in that, but I don't think that the U.S. is going to change its approach. On South Korea-China relations, there's been a lot of improvement. But I have to say, I think that my understanding of why President Park went to the parade in September, and I agree with Kathy, I don't think it was a huge deal. I don't think the U.S. was overjoyed, but I don't think it was a huge deal. But she went to try to get China to help on North Korea. And I think she basically failed. And I think when Xi Jinping, for example, when he went to South Korea earlier than that and has tried to enlist her into active, open opposition to Japan, even though they share a lot of similar historical grievances, he failed. You can get her to do that. I think there are good reasons for that. I'm almost done here. I know we're reading at one point, Professor Wang, I wasn't sure because you indicated you should have done something else. But I think in your paper it said good reasons to take time to answer. I don't think he had any good reasons. He may not have been able to answer the questions. He could have picked up the phone and say, yeah, this is really a serious problem and we're thinking about it and I'll get back to you. But I think it raises questions about the nature of China's approach to North Korea. And also I would say this whole business about China wanting to be a leader and have public goods. Well, public goods include providing some leadership in various ways, and I don't think that was a good example of it. And I think what's intriguing about it is also that what it might tell us about China's decision-making process. I don't think it tells us anything good about it, but I think it might tell us something. Final comment. Professor Yu, I think it is, who says at the end of the day, maintaining the status quo might be the only legitimate option. I think this was in the context of the analysis, I take the point, but I would only point out that at the end of the day, that might not be an option at all. that there are a lot of things that can happen that would change that status quo, including North Korea's behavior and including its domestic situation, which I think is a lot more uncertain over the long term, not necessarily at this moment, than one might seem. Thank you.
So I've been given permission to say thank you and
Have a nice day.